I never imagined the Arctic could feel so alive, yet so entirely hostile. My name is Alejandro Vukovic, former Special Forces, now survival and reconnaissance operative. I've faced ambushes in deserts, jungles, and war-torn cities, but this place, this frozen void, was different. The air itself seemed to hum, sharp against my lungs with every inhalation. My mission was simple, a solo survey of the abandoned outpost at the edge of the tundra to document anything dangerous before the government reclaims it or burns it down. The moment my boots crunched over the thin ice crust, I noticed the subtle wrongness of the landscape. Snow was uneven, with depressions I couldn't identify. My instincts screamed that something had passed here recently, though the weather reports indicated no traffic for months. Cold seeped through my layers, reaching the bone, yet my body tensed, not from cold, but from that primal sense of being watched. I reached the perimeter of the outpost as twilight draped its gray veil over the horizon. The structure was skeletal, walls corroded, metal girders twisting like frozen skeletons. Broken windows revealed shadowed interiors, each one a dark cavity suggesting secrets better left unexamined. The wind carried a faint metallic tang, decay, rust, and something ironier, almost sweet. It smelled vaguely of blood. I paused, scanning the horizon with trained eyes. Nothing, just the white expanse, undulating with distant snowdrifts, punctuated by the skeletal frame of the main building. But my instincts, the instincts honed in firefights, tracking enemies, surviving ambushes, kept prickling. Something wasn't right. The first sign came subtly, a soft tap, barely audible, like fingernails against steel, echoing from the interior. I froze. My grip tightened around my tactical flashlight, sweeping it across the corroded walls. Nothing. I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize. Animals? Loose metal? My mind playing tricks. But even as I thought it, I caught movement at the edge of the light, a shadow shifting, but no shape. I stepped forward cautiously, every sense sharpened. The air was biting, whipping against my exposed neck, but sweat ran down my spine despite the cold. I checked my comms. Dead. No satellite signal. Typical. Isolation wasn't just geographic here, it was total. I knew my survival now depended entirely on what I could see, hear, and think for myself. Inside the building, the atmosphere changed. The metal stairwells groaned under my weight, and every step sent echoes that seemed to grow longer, stretched unnaturally. Patches of frost clung to the walls, fracturing into tiny crystals at each vibration. I smelled something else, smoke, faint, as if a small fire had burned here recently, though I saw no soot. I paused, noting the irregularity. Nothing about this place made sense anymore. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow across the hallway. My training kicked in. I froze, listening, scanning, noting exits, structural weaknesses, and potential hiding spots. The shadow seemed to wait, perfectly still, as if testing my nerves. I whispered aloud, an old trick from urban ops, "I see you." Silence. Then a faint mimicry of my own voice echoed back, almost perfectly, but distorted, wrong. I stopped breathing, heart hammering. This wasn't human, not in any way I could comprehend. My mind raced through my options, fight, flee, hide. But instinct told me this wasn't a conventional threat. Conventional tactics wouldn't work here. Whoever or whatever was playing a long game. I moved deeper into the main hall, scanning walls for holes, listening to the unnatural creaks. The building seemed to breathe, metal expanding and contracting like lungs. The shadow appeared again, just at the corner of my vision, then gone. My pulse was steady, controlled. Training is a blessing in moments like this, but fear had begun to etch itself into my nerves, a slow crawl of cold ice. I set up a temporary perimeter with flares, marking my path, methodical and deliberate. My thoughts ran ahead. If it's intelligent, it's studying me as I study it. Any rash move, any sign of panic could be used against me. I recalled my time in covert ops, the months spent hiding in enemy territory, relying on reading movement, silence, even scent. And yet, this was different. The predator wasn't human. It didn't follow predictable patterns. A sound made me flinch. Footsteps? Or imitation? I swiveled, shining the light. A figure darted into the shadows, a humanoid outline, but wrong. Limbs stretched at impossible angles, features indistinct, blurred. I fired a warning shot. The figure vanished. No echoes of impact, no groans, just nothing. I realized then that my survival depended on improvisation. I had training, but no map, no backup, only instinct and observation. This place, the air, the shadows, even the smell, was alive, tuned to my presence, and whatever it was, it knew. I backed toward a reinforced door at the far end of the hall, checking for alternative exits, planning my next move. The wind outside rattled the walls, and somewhere deep in the outpost, a metallic clang echoed, repeated, measured, deliberate, like a countdown. And then I heard it, a whisper, unmistakably human, but not my own, calling my name. Alejandro. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just following me, it was inside my head. Segment 1 complete, 1,200 words. It sets up Alejandro's character and military mindset, remote atmospheric Arctic outpost, early signs of intelligent, malevolent danger, slow building tension, and subtle psychological horror. I froze, every muscle taut, listening. The whisper came again, closer this time, echoing from every angle of the hall as though the walls themselves had learned to speak. Alejandro. It wasn't just my name. It carried emotion, anger, mockery, and curiosity all at once. My survival instinct screamed, this wasn't a human taunt. Humans don't imitate the weight of your soul. I forced myself to inhale slowly, focus. Training didn't allow panic. I scanned the hall again, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Nothing. Only the skeletal remnants of the research station, twisted metal and icy patches reflecting a dim, unnatural light. My hand hovered over my sidearm, but instinct told me a gunshot would only announce my location, not protect me. I needed traps, observations, distractions, anything that would give me control. I crept toward a stairwell leading to the second floor, each step deliberate. Frost crunched underfoot, and the temperature seemed to drop with every meter climbed. Then I noticed it. Footprints in the thin layer of ice dusting the stairs. They weren't human, not fully. Long, narrow, almost perfectly symmetrical, leading up one floor and vanishing. My mind ran scenarios, escape routes, ambush points, alternative exits. The predator wasn't just stalking me, it was hurting me, shaping the environment to its advantage. I reached the top floor. A narrow corridor stretched before me, lined with office rooms, desks overturned, papers frozen in mid-collapse, coffee mugs shattered, their contents long gone. The air smelled sharper here, metallic and almost sweet, like iron overripe. My senses screamed caution. Something had been experimenting, playing in these rooms long before I arrived. Then I saw it, a shadow, thin and flickering against the wall at the far end of the corridor. I froze. Flashlight steadied. I spoke aloud, careful, controlled. I know you're here. Silence. Then, a faint click. The shadow moved toward me, but the motion was wrong. Limbs bending, stretching in unnatural ways like the laws of physics were optional. I swallowed hard, reminding myself, fear is a tool, not a chain. I had faced snipers, ambushes, hostile forces. Adaptation was survival. I grabbed a length of metal piping from a broken support beam, testing its weight. If it came close, I'd strike, but I had to force it into the open, draw it toward a predictable path. I remembered a trick from urban combat. Channel the threat. Make it come to you rather than you to it. I kicked a loose tile down the hallway. The shadow recoiled slightly, as though startled. A pulse of relief. It was intelligent, yes, but reactive. I moved, slow, controlled, every footstep measured, every breath calculated. And then I realized something worse. The whispers weren't just mimicking me, they were predicting me. It anticipated my movements. A voice, low and guttural, echoed, left, no, right, too slow. My pulse spiked. The entity was inside my mind, turning instinct against instinct. I ducked into a room on the right. Frost-coated computer terminals lined the walls. Broken screens flickered weakly, displaying fragmented data, coordinates, chemical formulas, personnel logs. None of it made sense yet, but the air hummed as though the building itself were aware of my intrusion. I could feel it studying me, calculating. It learns. A sudden sound made me spin. A mirror, cracked and spider-webbed, reflected not my own face, but a twisted approximation. Eyes too wide, lips stretched into a grin I didn't recognize. My gut screamed, "Don't look, don't look." But the military in me forced focus. Observation is survival. I noted the details, the pattern of mimicry, the subtle distortions. Not human, but able to imitate. I bolted, darting down the hallway and kicking open doors to disrupt potential hiding spaces. My ears strained for the next sound, the next whisper, the heartbeat I was sure I could now hear echoing behind the walls. My flashlight caught a glimpse, a hand impossibly long, disappearing around a corner. I forced myself to slow, to plan. This wasn't about courage anymore. It was about strategy. I improvised. I rigged one of the old lab doors with a pile of metal debris to create a temporary barricade. Then I tore open a cabinet, scattering flammable chemicals I recognized from old training in survival chemistry. A small fire, just enough smoke, could provide a signal or a distraction. And then I understood something crucial. This predator was not merely hunting for food. It was hunting for fear, testing the limits of my mind, gauging my reactions, feeding on hesitation. Every calculated move I made, every heartbeat I attempted to control, shaped the game it was playing. I backed into a reinforced control room, sealing the door behind me. The faint glow from the outside drifted through cracks in the metal. I pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing. Then a faint tap, tap, tap from the other side. A voice whispered again, soft, mocking, insistent. "You can't hide, Alejandro." My training screamed at me. Find exits, find control, survive. I scanned the room, broken monitors, a metal desk, ventilation shafts. My eyes caught a narrow duct partially concealed behind a console. I could maybe crawl through it, though I knew the risk. Tight space, unknown length, potential ambush. But staying was certain death. I stripped off my backpack, keeping only essentials, flashlight, sidearm, and my tactical knife. Every second counted. Heart hammering, I forced myself to move into the duct, crawling inch by inch, aware that the air grew colder, thinner. Whispers followed me, low now, murmuring words I didn't understand but felt in my bones, threats, promises, commands. Then the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal, close enough to feel the vibrations along my arms. Something was with me outside the duct, testing me, shaping me into prey. My grip tightened on the knife. If it came this far, I would fight, but I had learned that patience was a weapon too. The creature expected panic. I denied it. I emerged finally into a service corridor that led to the exterior of the outpost. Snow blew through the gaps in the walls and the cold hit me like a slap. Relief momentary but fleeting. I could see the horizon, empty, vast, white, but I knew it wasn't empty. Something moved beneath the snow. Unseen, waiting. Something had studied me, learned me, and was already planning its next move. I kept moving, slow, careful, toward a ridge I had scouted on the satellite map before I lost signal. The entity didn't follow immediately, but I knew it would. Whatever it was, it could wait. It was patient, and somewhere deep in the outpost I could swear I heard my own footsteps echo back at me. But not quite matching, not quite mine. The ridge promised safety, or at least the illusion of it. Snow stretched endlessly in every direction, a frozen wasteland under the weak Arctic light. My lungs burned with the cold, each breath sharp and white, but I forced myself to keep moving. Every crunch of ice underfoot sounded wrong, too loud, too precise. My instincts screamed. It was following, always just out of sight. I paused behind a snowdrift, scanning the horizon. Nothing. Then I noticed the shadows, not cast by the terrain, but independent of it. They shifted, elongated, detached from any logical source. I recognized the pattern from the outpost: mimicry, patience, observation. It was studying me, waiting for the precise moment to strike. I had to act. I couldn't outrun it, not in this open expanse. My training kicked in. Create terrain advantage, use the environment, anticipate the predator's moves. I dropped my pack, scattering supplies, anything to distract it. I set a small flare, careful to stay hidden behind a snowbank. The flare hissed, sparks flying, drawing attention. Footprints, or something that looked like them, diverged from my path, following the flare. It took the bait. I darted across the ridge, keeping low, listening. The snow was silent now, except for the faintest whispering in the wind. My skin prickled. I knew it was close, just beyond the white veil. The whisper returned, "You can't escape." This time it sounded almost amused. I reached a collapsed tower, partially buried in snow. A doorway, reinforced steel, offered a temporary sanctuary. Inside, the temperature was marginally warmer, the air stale but breathable. I barricaded it with beams and metal scraps, checking every corner. My heart raced, but my mind stayed sharp. Panic wouldn't save me. Precision would. Then I saw it, or rather, glimpsed through it. A reflection in a shattered window pane, a humanoid figure, distorted, crouched just outside. Limbs too long, movements fluid and unnatural. Its head tilted unnaturally, observing me, calculating. I gripped my knife, ready to strike if it came too close, but I knew this would not be enough. Not really. I needed a plan. Improvisation had kept me alive this long, but the predator's intelligence surpassed mine. It wasn't brute strength I had to fear, it was strategy. It studied me, adapted, waited. My mind raced. Traps, distractions, terrain, fire, noise, anything that could give me an edge. I found an old supply cache, flares, frozen fuel canisters, some outdated but functional machinery. An idea formed. I set a line of flares leading out from the tower, sprinkled a few fuel traces, and prepared for the final gamble. If it came in, I would have one chance to drive it back, or at least create a path to escape. Minutes passed. The air grew colder. Then a sound, a low, resonant vibration that made the metal walls hum. The creature had come. I could hear its footsteps crunching lightly on the snow outside. Then a pause. Silence. My chest tightened, and then the whisper right behind me, though I was certain no one could be there. Not fast enough. I spun, knife ready, flashlight sweeping. Nothing, only the walls, shadows dancing. My mind screamed, "It can imitate me, anticipate me. It can be anywhere." I ignited the line of fuel. Flames hissed, licking toward the entrance. Sparks flew. The heat was immediate, suffocating, but it gave me a sliver of advantage. Outside, I saw movement. It recoiled, hesitated, studying, learning. A chance. I bolted, running into the snow, toward a faint ridge I remembered from the satellite maps. Behind me, the creature didn't chase immediately. Instead, shadows danced along the snow, taunting, mimicking, studying. I didn't look back. I ran blindly, heart hammering, lungs screaming in the cold, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Hours, or maybe minutes, time blurred. I pushed through waist-deep snow, exhaustion threatening to overtake me. I reached the edge of the outpost's perimeter. A cliff dropping into the frozen expanse below. No other paths. I paused, listening. Silence. No whispers, no movement. Only the Arctic wind cutting across my face. I allowed myself a brief moment of relief. I had survived, somehow. But then I noticed it. Tracks. Not mine. Parallel tracks leading into the snow, disappearing as though they never existed. The predator hadn't left, but it hadn't attacked either. It was patient. Waiting. Learning. I didn't understand it fully, not yet. I only knew that what I'd encountered was not a simple animal, not a human, not even a conventional predator. It was something else entirely, something that could think, anticipate, and manipulate. And I had survived only because I had adapted, improvised, and relied on every ounce of training I had. As the weak light of the Arctic sun stretched across the snow, I realized the truth. This place was not just dangerous. It was alive in ways I could not measure, attuned to fear, patience, and cunning. I was alive, yes, but so was it, and it was still there. I retreated from the ridge slowly, keeping to the shadows, moving silently. Every instinct screamed to flee, but every step reminded me, one wrong move, one miscalculation, and I would not leave this frozen wasteland. And somewhere deep in the skeletal remains of the outpost, I could feel it watching, waiting, knowing. My survival was temporary, the mystery unresolved. Segment 3 complete, 1,200 words. This segment reaches full confrontation tension. Alejandro improvises and survives using skill and cunning. The predator shows superior intelligence and patience, ends with an open-ended, haunting conclusion. The entity remains, mystery unresolved. The wind had grown harsher, slicing across my face like knives as I descended the ridge. My body ached, muscles torn, lungs burning, skin numb. But the real exhaustion was mental. Every instinct honed through years of combat screamed for me to remain hyper alert. Every shadow, every whisper of movement in the snow set my nerves alight. I kept moving toward a distant tree line I remembered from the satellite maps, hoping to reach cover before night fully fell. But the Arctic sun had barely risen, pale and low, casting long, unnatural shadows across the snow. Even the landscape seemed wrong. The snow reflected light in strange ways, patterns that almost looked like footprints, fleeting silhouettes, echoes of movement that weren't mine. I paused to catch my breath, scanning the horizon. Silence. Relief. Then, faintly, the whisper returned. Not close, but everywhere at once. You can't leave. A shiver ran down my spine. It didn't matter that I was trained to survive, that I had faced impossible odds before. This wasn't a conventional threat. This was intelligence, patience, and malevolence combined. It didn't strike because it needed to. It struck because it wanted to manipulate, to observe, to teach me fear. I forced myself to move, slow, deliberate, masking my panic. I kept my knife ready, flashlight low, eyes scanning every snowdrift, every shadow. My mind ran through the encounter over and over, every sound, every movement, every whisper. I had survived through improvisation and patience, yet I knew instinctively. Surviving once didn't mean the end. As I approached the edge of the tree line, I saw signs, twisted branches, footprints that weren't mine, depressions in the snow too deep for human feet alone. The predator had been here, waiting, shaping the terrain, leaving clues like breadcrumbs, daring me to understand. I stumbled into the trees, branches scratching at my face and arms. The forest offered some cover, a chance to slow the predator's observation, but it also smelled different. Damp, mossy, carrying the faint trace of decayed metal. The outpost's influence, whatever it was, seemed to extend beyond its walls. The predator didn't just inhabit the station, it had claimed the land around it. I pressed deeper, moving cautiously. Every instinct told me it was still tracking me. My flashlight's beam caught movement in the shadows, too fast, too precise, gone before my eyes could focus. I whispered aloud, a trick to ground myself. I'm not afraid. My voice sounded small, yet almost pathetic, but I forced myself to believe it. Then came the sound that froze me. Not a whisper, not footsteps, but something behind me, soft, deliberate, mimicking my own breathing. I spun, knife raised, flashlight darting across the trees. Nothing. Only darkness, only snow. And then a shadow detached itself from the trees, moving against the wind, limbs bending in impossible angles, eyes glowing faintly with intelligence I couldn't comprehend. I ran. Not through strategy, not with precision, but with raw survival instinct. Every step crunched in the snow, every breath ripped through my chest. I had no map, no communications, no backup, only instinct. And somewhere behind me, I knew. It followed, not immediately, but patiently, calculating every movement, every falter. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time no longer existed in the Arctic wasteland. I stumbled into a shallow ravine, ice underfoot, branches tearing at my clothes, and then, miraculously, I reached a frozen riverbed, wide, flat, open. A chance to move quickly without cover, a gamble for speed over concealment. I ran across the ice, testing its strength as I went, flashlight bouncing, knife ready. And as I reached the other side, I dared to glance back. The shadow was there, barely visible, standing at the tree line, motionless, observing. Not attacking, not retreating, waiting. I didn't understand it fully. I only knew one thing. Whatever it wasn't done. It wasn't bound by hunger or fear. It was bound by observation, patience, and intelligence far beyond anything human. And somehow I had survived. I paused, chest heaving, snow melting against my exposed skin. I realized the truth. Survival wasn't victory. It was temporary reprieve. I could leave this place physically alive, but the memory, the knowledge of what watched, waited, and learned, that would never leave me. I started moving again, slower now, toward a faint line of hills that promised shelter. The wind carried whispers, almost indistinct, fading with distance. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down I knew it wasn't. At the edge of the ridge, I looked back one last time. The outpost stood skeletal against the horizon, frozen in the pale light, silent, or so it seemed. and in the shadows around it, I swore I saw movement. Limbs stretching, bending, shifting impossibly. Watching, learning, patient. I had escaped, yes, but the predator remained. The mystery remained. The Arctic wasteland had claimed its secret once again, leaving only the memory of fear and the faintest echo of a whisper trailing in the wind. You can't leave. And I knew it would be waiting, always, wherever I returned. Patient, observant, hungry for the next mistake. My name is Dr. Elias Koren, and I've spent most of my adult life chasing the secrets locked in ice. To most people, glaciers are just walls of white, cold monoliths untouched by time. But to me, they're archives, strata of frozen memory, each layer a page written in snow and ash, pollen and dust, the breath of ancient storms preserved across millennia. I came here to read that story. At least, that's what I told myself when I accepted this assignment. In truth, the deeper reason was pride. I'd been passed over for funding twice in the last 3 years, and when the Institute finally offered me the chance to investigate unexplained seismic readings in the far north, I couldn't say no, even if it meant isolation. Even if it meant wintering alone at Station N6, a relic of Cold War research built into the permafrost, half buried in ice and forgotten by everyone but mapmakers and desperate scientists like me. The helicopter had dropped me 2 weeks ago, its blades thundering against the stillness. I still remember the sharp cut of the air against my lungs as I watched it lift away, growing smaller until it vanished into the pale horizon. Then there was only the howl of the Arctic wind, a sound that seemed less like air and more like something alive dragging claws across the ice. Inside the station, the silence pressed close. The place smelled of rust and stale oil with faint sweetness, like old blood frozen into metal. My boots echoed as I walked the narrow corridors, flashlight beam catching ice crystals blooming across the walls. The generators worked, though they groaned like dying animals when I coaxed them on. Heat bled into the air grudgingly, but it was enough. I tried to build a rhythm: wake, measure, log, drill, sleep. The routine kept me sane, but in the vast Arctic, time is a strange liquid. Days and nights blur under the eternal gray. Sometimes I swore the sun never moved, just hovered above the horizon, a pale coin corroded by clouds. My breath fogged even indoors, and frost crept over the edges of the windows, obscuring the endless white outside. It wasn't long before I started noticing the vibrations. At first, I thought they were the station itself, the shifting of old foundations against the ice. But then they came with rhythm. Subtle, measured pulses that shivered up through the floor panels and into my boots. Not constant, but regular enough that I couldn't dismiss them as wind or settling ice. On the third night, as I was logging temperature data, the vibrations rose through the steel like a heartbeat, steady, heavy, a thump that resonated in my chest more than my ears. I froze, pen hovering above the page, listening, then silence, the kind that amplifies the rush of your own blood. I told myself it was the glacier shifting, ice calving deep underground, the sound carried like a drum. But unease gnawed at me. I've studied glaciers my whole life. They groan, they crack, they roar when they move. They don't pulse. By the fifth night, I'd begun to dream differently. Normally, isolation brings its own strange theater of sleep. Dreams of people you miss, of warmth, of food. But now when I closed my eyes, I saw shapes behind the ice. Outlines pressed thin against translucent walls, shifting as though alive. And I heard voices, muffled, distorted, like someone calling to me from beneath a frozen lake. I woke with frost on my eyelashes and my heart thundering. I tried not to think about it. Work was a shield. The seismic sensors still recorded anomalous readings, sharp tremors without logical cause. My core samples came up wrong too, layers fractured strangely, riddled with fine black veins that looked like ash, but crumbled into nothing between my fingers. Once, while drilling, I hit something hollow. The auger groaned, then slipped forward as if entering a cavity. I shut it off immediately, staring at the dark cylinder of ice, but I couldn't bring myself to peer down. The weather turned harsher. Wind clawed at the station with the voice of a predator, screaming through every seam. Snow slammed against the shutters with such force that I felt the walls tremble. And in that storm, something else moved. I first heard it while checking the generator in the storage bay. A whisper, not wind, not static, clearer than that. My name, Elias. I spun so hard I slipped on the frosted floor. The flashlight beam swung wildly across crates and shadows, catching only the glitter of ice. My throat tightened, air rasping like glass through my lungs. There was no one here. No one but me. I stood there far too long, light trembling in my grip, before forcing myself back to work. I told myself it was a trick of exhaustion, a misfiring synapse. But that night, as I tried to sleep, the station's walls seemed thinner. Every creak and pop of ice expansion turned into footsteps. Every whisper of the wind became syllables I almost recognized. The dreams worsened. I dreamt of corridors that extended beyond the station, narrow tunnels bored straight into the glacier. Their walls pulsed like veins, slick with meltwater. I would walk them endlessly, the voices growing clearer, until I reached a place where the ice grew thin and black shapes pressed their mouths against it, whispering for me to let them through. I woke once to find myself standing at the hatch to the ice tunnel outside, still in my thermal clothes, hand on the lever. I didn't remember leaving bed. My boots were dusted with fresh snow. That terrified me more than anything, because if I wasn't in control, who was? The following day, the vibrations returned, stronger, closer. This time, they rattled the glassware on my workbench. A single pulse shook dust from the rafters, followed by another, then another, like footsteps, like something moving beneath the ice. And then I heard it again, my name. Only this time it wasn't a whisper. It was right outside the station wall. The name was spoken with a weight that didn't belong to air. It vibrated through the walls, through the floor, through me. My first instinct was denial, that it was a trick of the wind, a quirk of the mind cracking under solitude. But the way the sound settled in my bones, resonating like struck metal, told me otherwise. I stood frozen in the dim glow of the workroom, breath clouding, ears straining. The silence that followed was worse. My heartbeat became a hammer in my head, loud enough I thought whatever was outside could hear it. I forced myself to step closer to the wall, pressing a gloved hand to the frost-laced metal. Nothing. Only cold. But then, just at the edge of perception, a scrape, like fingernails dragged across the outer hull. I snatched my hand back. My flashlight beam jittered across the room, catching dust motes and glittering ice, but nothing else. I stayed awake until dawn's dim gray seeped weakly through the station's frosted windows, sitting upright in the chair with my boots still on. Sleep was no longer safe. The following day, I told myself I needed proof. If the mind is prone to tricks, evidence is the antidote. So I set up my recorder in the generator bay, microphone pressed against the steel wall where I'd heard the voice. I left it running for hours while I drilled new core samples. When I played the tape back that evening, at first it was only static, a low hiss, the occasional pop. Then came the vibration, faint but clear, rattling against the mic, and after a long stretch of white noise, something else. Elias. The voice was slow, deliberate, not entirely human, stretched as though spoken through ice. My stomach lurched. I replayed it again and again, volume low, trying to find artifacts, distortions, anything that would explain it away. But the syllables remained, undeniable. My name, carried from outside where no voice could be. I sat for a long time in the dim station light, staring at the recorder. Proof was what I wanted, wasn't it? Then, why did holding it feel like cradling a loaded weapon? The nights worsened. The vibrations became more frequent. The pulse in the ice matching the rhythm of a slow, deliberate gait. Sometimes it circled the station, moving from one wall to the next. My dreams blurred with waking, and once I swear I heard the door latch rattle as though something tried it from the outside. I began to speak aloud just to hear another human voice. Short phrases, temperature readings, journal notes, scraps of thought. Anything to cut the silence that pressed in like a weight. But sometimes in the pause after I spoke, another voice whispered faintly in reply. Too soft to catch. Too close to ignore. On the 11th night, I gave in to compulsion. I opened the hatch. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside sharpened and still. The snow reflected what little moonlight cut through the clouds, a pale glow that seemed to come from nowhere. My breath curled and froze in the air. I swept my flashlight across the endless plain. No movement, no tracks, only the featureless sheet of ice stretching toward the horizon. But the vibrations were stronger out there, resonating up through the ground into my boots. I knelt, pressed a gloved hand flat against the surface. The ice trembled beneath me, a faint but steady thrum like a vast organ beating far below. And faintly, from beneath the frozen crust, I heard voices. Not just mine now, dozens, maybe hundreds, muffled and layered, overlapping like a choir trapped in stone. Some cried, some pleaded, some laughed, and among them, again, was my name. I stumbled back inside, slamming the hatch. My pulse thudded so hard, my vision blurred. I braced myself against the door until the vibrations faded. That was the night I realized this was no mere phenomenon. Something was beneath the glacier. Something alive. The next days blurred into paranoia. I barely ate, barely slept. I checked the walls constantly, listened for the scrape of movement outside. My scientific notes devolved into frantic scrawls, diagrams of the station overlaid with where I'd heard the voices. I even marked the floor panels where the vibrations came strongest, as though mapping the path of something circling me below. I considered calling for extraction, but the radio array had been dead since the storm 3 days prior. Only static answered my hails, no matter how I tuned the frequency. I was alone. Completely. One evening, desperate, I followed the vibrations. They were strongest in the south corridor, where a rusted service hatch led into a storage annex carved directly into the ice. Few lights still worked down there. My breath fogged in the dark as I stepped through, flashlight trembling in my grip. The walls gleamed with frost, slick and wet in places where meltwater ran. The vibration grew louder, clearer, a steady pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. Hairline cracks spider webbing across the ice wall at the far end of the chamber. Behind the cracks, something dark shifted. I froze, watching. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of shadow. Then the cracks widened, pushed outward from within. Something pressed against the ice, a hand. No flesh, no color, just the suggestion of bone and sinew carved in frost, pressing from the other side. Fingers splayed, straining against the barrier. My light caught on empty hollows where eyes should be. The hand moved. It curled into a fist and struck the ice, sending a crack running toward my boots. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the light. My heart felt like it would rip through my ribs. I turned and fled, crashing through the corridor, not stopping until I slammed the bulkhead shut behind me. I stayed awake that night with the recorder clutched to my chest, listening to the silence stretch into morning. But when I finally dared to play it back, the tape was not silent. It was filled with breathing. Not mine. Something else. And under the breathing, faint and guttural, was a phrase I couldn't deny. Almost free. The phrase clung to me long after the recorder clicked off. Almost free. It repeated itself in my head like an echo that didn't belong to me. I wanted to believe it was some misinterpretation, wind resonance, data corruption, anything. But the cadence was too deliberate, the words too exact. And worst of all, it wasn't just speech. It was a promise. The days that followed turned the station into a prison. I stopped using the South Annex altogether, keeping the bulkhead locked and reinforced with crates. But the vibrations still reached me. Stronger, louder. The floor shivered at odd hours, rattling instruments and scattering papers from my desk. The sound came not only from below now, but from the walls, as if whatever had been trapped was finding new seams to push through. I tried to resume my work, thinking that focus would steady me. But science is rooted in observation, and what I observed was wrong. The core samples grew stranger. Pale veins shot through with black dust that writhed faintly when thawed, like threads moving of their own accord. I sealed them in jars, but even through the glass, I swore I heard faint clicking noises. My journal entries shifted from precise measurements to frantic confessions. I wrote in block letters to stop my hand from shaking. I listed the voices I heard, the phrases, the times of night. Sometimes, in the margins, I scribbled things I couldn't explain. Drawings of faces pressing against thin ice, diagrams of tunnels that didn't exist. When I read them in the morning, I didn't remember drawing half of them. The dreams grew worse too. Always tunnels, always whispers. But now I saw myself among the figures trapped behind the ice, eyes hollow, mouth moving in sync with the voices. I would wake with my throat raw as though I'd been shouting in my sleep. One night, I awoke to a sound more terrifying than all the whispers combined. The generator stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. No hum of electricity, no rattle of vents, only the scream of the wind outside. Darkness swallowed the station whole. I groped for my flashlight, panic clawing my chest. Without power, the heaters would fail, and in this cold, failure was death. But as soon as I turned the beam on, I wished for the dark again. Frost bloomed across the inner walls like spreading veins, thick and fast. My breath crystallized instantly in the air, and beneath the groan of shifting ice, I heard it, breathing. Not mechanical, not mine. Slow, heavy inhalations that fogged the frost in patches along the corridor. Something was inside. I stumbled backward, flashlight beam trembling, until I hit the workroom door. I slammed it shut, pressing my weight against it, though nothing pressed back. My lungs burned with the cold. The silence stretched, then faintly a sound on the other side. Knocking. 3 slow raps. I don't know how long I stayed there shaking until the generator coughed and roared back to life. The lights flickered. The frost receded. When I dared to open the door, the corridor was empty, but etched into the frost on the wall opposite were handprints. Not human-sized. Larger. Too large. That was when I decided I couldn't stay. The radio was dead, but I still had the emergency beacon, an old unit designed to transmit a distress pulse to any passing aircraft. I dug it out from the supply crate, fingers numb, and carried it to the communications room. My breath echoed loud against the steel as I powered it on. A steady red light blinked, searching for connection, and then it stopped blinking. Instead, a voice came through. Elias. I staggered back, nearly dropping the beacon. Static hissed around the word, but it was clear, too clear. My name, my Nifoken in that stretched, icebound tone. I fumbled with the controls, trying to shut it off, but the unit wouldn't respond. The red light burned steady, and the voice continued, repeating my name over and over until it warped into laughter. Low, wet, and wrong. I smashed the beacon against the desk until the casing shattered and the light died. Only then did the voice stop. Sleep was impossible after that. I prowled the station like a trapped animal, flashlight beams swinging across corners that seemed too dark, too deep. My ears ached from straining. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps in parallel with mine, always just beyond the next door. By the 14th day, my reflection betrayed me. I caught sight of myself in the frosted mirror of the washroom. My skin was pale, stretched, eyes hollowed from lack of sleep, but worse. When I leaned closer, the reflection did not. For a fraction of a second, it lingered, lips moving though mine were still. I staggered back, pulse roaring, and the image snapped to match me again. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside. Not just the station, inside me. The whispers followed me even when I pressed my palms against my ears. Sometimes they spoke in words I understood, sometimes in guttural tones that weren't of any language I knew. Always they beckoned, urging me back toward the South Annex, toward the cracked wall of ice, toward freedom. For it, not me. I resisted as long as I could, but curiosity is a scientist's curse, and perhaps deep down, something more primal had already taken root. On the 15th night, I unbarred the annex door. The corridor was darker than before, frost glittering like a million tiny eyes. The vibration was stronger, shaking through my bones. As I reached the end, I lifted the flashlight, and my breath stopped. The cracks in the wall had widened. A hollow cavity gaped behind them, black as a throat, and something moved inside it. A shape pressed against the thinning barrier, shoulders, arms, the hint of a torso carved of shadow and ice. Its head tilted unnaturally, and though it had no eyes, I felt its gaze burrow into me. And then it spoke, not in whispers this time, but in a voice that filled the entire chamber. "Let me in." The ice groaned. Splinters rained to the floor. The wall bowed outward with every syllable. I stumbled back, flashlight clattering from my hand. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I stood frozen, watching the impossible. Then another crack thundered across the ice, jagged and final. A fracture ran straight to my boots. The floor buckled, and I realized with sick certainty the glacier wasn't holding it much longer. The fracture shot outward like lightning, racing across the floor. The vibration roared now, no longer a pulse, but a sustained tremor that rattled every bone in my body. The walls groaned like tortured metal. Above me, frost dust rained from the ceiling in fine, glittering sheets. I staggered back, heart a violent drum in my chest, as the ice wall bulged again. Cracks spread like a spider web, and through them I glimpsed the thing within. It was no simple shadow. Its body was an amalgam of bone-white ridges and translucent flesh, sculpted not by nature but by something older, crueler. Hollow sockets burned with pale light, and its jaw opened in silence before the sound caught up, a guttural moan that seemed to vibrate from inside my own skull. I turned and fled. My boots slipped on the frost, slamming me into the wall, but adrenaline dragged me upright. I sprinted down the corridor, my own ragged breath drowned out by the echoing groan as the ice wall shattered behind me. The annex shook with collapse. Steel beams screamed, glass shattered. I crashed through the bulkhead door and through the lock, pressing my weight against it, as if the thin barrier of rusted metal could hold back something ancient and unbound. My ears rang with silence afterward, but deep beneath it I could still feel the vibration, heavier now, closer. I stumbled to the control room, half blind with panic, and dug frantically through the emergency manual. Extraction was impossible. No radio, no beacon. The helicopter wasn't scheduled to return for another month, if the weather even allowed it. That left only two choices: stay or flee across the ice on foot. I thought of the endless white beyond the station, the howling wind, the temperatures that could turn skin to brittle glass in minutes. Survival outside was impossible without support, but staying here meant waiting to be found by whatever had broken through. The walls shuddered, dust sifted from the ceiling. I made my decision. I gathered what I could: thermal gear, flare gun, a week's worth of rations crammed into my pack. My hands trembled so badly I dropped the water canister twice before strapping it down. Then I grabbed my ice axe. It was the only weapon I had. When I opened the main hatch, the world was a void. Snow swirled in furious spirals, driven by winds that roared like living things. Visibility was a handful of meters at best, the horizon lost to the storm. My first step onto the ice nearly pitched me sideways, the gale ripping at my hood. I hunched low, forcing one boot in front of the other. Behind me, the station groaned again. I risked a glance back. Through the swirling snow, I saw light, faint, bluish, pulsing from inside the annex windows. It flickered like a heartbeat, swelling, dimming, swelling again, and in its glow a silhouette moved across the frost-streaked glass. Too tall, shoulders scraping the ceiling, limbs bending wrong. My breath hitched. The silhouette stopped. Even through the storm, I felt it turn toward me. I stumbled forward, nearly blind, half running, half crawling across the ice. The storm swallowed the station, but the vibrations followed, thudding up through the glacier with each of my desperate steps. Hours blurred. The storm offered no mercy, no horizon. My eyelashes froze together, and my lungs burned with each inhale. I lit a flare to cut through the whiteout, its orange glow staining the snow like blood. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I could make it to the supply depot 15 kilometers south, I'd have a chance. But the voices came with me. They rose beneath the howl of the storm, threading through the wind like wires pulled taut. At first only faint, then louder. Dozens, hundreds, a chorus that rose and fell in rhythm with the vibration under my boots. Some called my name, some laughed, some screamed, and then one voice cut through them all. Elias. Behind you. I spun. For an instant, I saw nothing but the storm. Then, A shape emerged. It was wrong in every way the human mind resists describing, half-formed as though sculpted by blind hands. Limbs too long, torso tapering into a mass that seemed to ripple like water. Its head tilted, and the sockets burned with pale fire. The storm bent around it, snow curling against an invisible wall. I raised the flare instinctively, its light washing the thing in fire red. For a moment it paused, body twitching in unnatural spasms. Then it stepped forward. The glacier groaned beneath its weight. I turned and ran. My body screamed with exhaustion, lungs tearing, but adrenaline kept me upright. The voices followed, overlapping until they were one endless howl. I fired the flare gun blindly behind me. The hiss and burst of light painted the storm, but when I glanced back, the thing was still there. Closer. Its gait was not fast. It didn't need to be. Each step devoured distance, dragging it forward with inevitability. My compass needle spun uselessly in circles. Orientation was gone. Panic clawed at me. I could wander in this storm forever, freeze into the ice like the others whose whispers I'd heard. The whispers. A thought struck me like lightning. What if they weren't calling for me, but to me? What if the glacier wasn't just a prison but a grave, filled with others like me who had tried to escape? The idea nearly collapsed me into the snow, but my body moved on instinct, driven by a stubborn, primal will to live. I found myself skidding down a slope where the storm had scoured the ice into a sheer ridge. At the bottom, jagged fissures yawned like open mouths. The vibrations were strongest here. The voices shrieked all at once. I stopped at the edge of a crevasse, staring into its black throat. Wind screamed through it, carrying the smell of something older than rot. The ground trembled as the entity drew closer, its steps deliberate, patient. I gripped the ice axe until my knuckles ached. There was no path forward, only down. And then a thought slipped unbidden into my mind, clear as speech. Jump. It wasn't my thought. I knew that, but my legs bent all the same, muscles coiling. Behind me, the entity stepped into the flare's dying light. Its arm reached out, hand like a cage of ice and bone, and I leapt. The world became weightless. The scream of the storm cut off as the crevasse swallowed me whole. My body pinwheeled in the dark, the ice axe tearing free of my grip. For one terrible second, I thought I'd fall forever. Then the walls narrowed, crushing the breath from me, scraping my arms and legs raw through layers of fabric. I hit a ledge hard enough to knock the air out of me. Pain lanced up my ribs. For a moment, I lay curled, gasping in the absolute dark, my only sound the sharp rasp of my own lungs. The storm's roar was distant now, muffled by tons of ice above. I forced myself to move. My fingers fumbled for the flashlight clipped to my belt, shaking so badly I nearly dropped it when the beam flared. The light caught glistening walls of ice that shone like glass, refracting the beam into distorted shapes. And behind those shapes, faces. Dozens of them. Pressed into the ice as if they'd been frozen mid-scream. Mouths open, eyes wide, their features warped by the frost. Some looked ancient, the outlines half melted. Others looked recent. One man's beard was still sharp, his eyes filled with panic as though he'd been entombed only days ago. I scrambled back against the wall, my breath fogging the light. My mind clawed for explanation. Optical illusions, trapped pockets of meltwater. But when I pressed my glove to the ice, the nearest face shifted, its lips moved, the whisper filled the chamber. Elias. I ripped my hand back with a strangled sound, heart battering my ribs. The chorus rose again, hundreds of voices at once echoing up through the fissure. They spoke in languages I didn't know, cries layered over guttural chants, and beneath it all, the steady, inhuman breath. The light flickered. I swung it wildly, desperate, and for an instant it illuminated something deeper in the chasm. Movement. The entity was descending, not falling, not climbing, simply gliding down the walls as though the ice welcomed it. Its limbs dragged long furrows in the frost, and its head tilted in grotesque curiosity. The pale fire in its sockets burned brighter, lighting the walls in ghostly blue. Panic seized me. My eyes darted, searching for escape. The ledge sloped downward into a narrow tunnel carved by meltwater, barely wide enough to crawl. I didn't think. I dropped to my stomach and shoved myself in, clawing forward with numb fingers. The tunnel pressed tight, squeezing my ribs, my shoulders scraping raw. Ice crystals rained into my face with every shift. My pack snagged and I tore it loose, abandoning food, water, everything. Only the flashlight stayed clenched between my teeth, its beam cutting ahead into the claustrophobic dark. The whispers followed me, growing louder, echoing from every surface. Sometimes they overlapped with my own thoughts until I couldn't tell which were mine. Go deeper. Stay. You belong here. We are waiting. I dragged myself forward anyway. My muscles screamed. Frost burned the skin where fabric had torn. My breath came in shallow, desperate pulls, and still the tunnel seemed endless. Then, space. The tunnel spat me out into a cavern so vast my light could not find the ceiling. The beam revealed jagged walls of black ice streaked with veins of something darker, stone, or perhaps something older. Water dripped in rhythmic beats, echoing like a clock in the silence. And in the center of the cavern was the hollow. A depression in the ice, circular, perfectly smooth as though carved by deliberate hands. It pulsed faintly with bluish light, throbbing in rhythm with the vibrations I'd felt for weeks. The air was warmer here, damp, carrying a smell of rot mixed with iron. I crept to the edge, legs trembling. Inside the hollow, frozen beneath a skin of translucent ice, were bodies. Layers upon layers spiraled together like the rings of a tree. Men and women in tattered gear, their eyes open, mouths twisted in terror. Some reached upward, fingers splayed as though clawing toward the surface. My stomach lurched. I staggered back, gagging. But before I could flee, the cavern shook. The entity had followed. It slid from the tunnel behind me, shoulders scraping the walls, body unfolding to fill the chamber. Its form seemed clearer now, no longer just suggestion. Rib-like ridges jutted from its chest, arms branching like frozen trees, each finger tipped with claws of ice. Its face was a smooth mask broken only by those burning hollows. It turned toward the hollow, and the bodies within began to stir. Their mouths moved in unison. The voices that erupted shook the cavern like thunder. Free us! I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, but it did nothing. The sound came from inside me as much as outside. My name threaded through it, over and over. Elias! 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 The entity raised one clawed hand and pressed it against the ice covering the hollow. Cracks spiderwebbed instantly. Light flared beneath, brighter than the flare gun, searing my vision. The voices rose into a scream. Somewhere inside me, buried under terror, instinct screamed too. Don't let it open. Don't let it finish. I lunged forward. My fingers closed around the only tool left to me, the ice axe I'd lost earlier, now half buried in the frost. I don't know if I believed I could hurt it, but the act of holding it steadied me. I roared wordlessly and swung. The blade bit into the creature's arm. For a moment, it seemed to pierce solid matter. A hiss like boiling water erupted as shards exploded outward. The entity shrieked, a sound that rattled my bones and froze the air in my lungs. But the damage was shallow. The wound closed before my eyes, sealing with crackling frost. It turned its gaze fully on me. The sockets blazed white, and suddenly the cavern vanished. I was standing outside the station again, the storm gone, the air unnaturally still. The sky above was a ceiling of ice, lit from within by shifting shapes. And surrounding me were the others, the frozen faces I'd seen in the walls, now walking, their skin pallid, eyes black. They circled me silently, mouths opening and closing in mimicry of words. I clutched the axe, spinning in place, but no sound came from them, only from above, where the entity's voice whispered directly into my skull. You are already part of me. The illusion shattered as quickly as it came. I was back in the cavern, on my knees, ice axe trembling in my grip. The entity still loomed over the hollow, its hand pressing harder, fractures widening. The bodies beneath the ice thrashed now, clawing, screaming. The air shook with their desperation. I knew then that if the ice broke, if the hollow opened, whatever had been bound here would not remain beneath the glacier. It would walk, and it would take me with it. The fractures raced like veins of lightning across the hollow, bright fissures spidering outward until the ice above the pit looked like a thin, trembling shell. Beneath it, the bodies writhed, their mouths open in a scream I felt more than heard. The entity's claws dug deeper, and the cracks spread with a sound like gunfire. I gripped the ice axe so tight, the wooden handle groaned. My rational mind, what little of it remained, whispered that this was useless, an insect swinging at a glacier. But fear is its own weapon. It makes you do impossible things. I lunged. The axe bit into the entity's arm where it pressed against the ice. Frost exploded outward, blinding me in a spray of shards. The creature's head snapped toward me, the hollow sockets flaring with blinding white. The cavern erupted with sound. Thousands of voices shrieked at once, layered into a storm of language and agony. My ears bled, my vision whited out. I thought the sheer force of it would rip me apart. But when the haze cleared, the ice shell over the hollow was intact. The cracks still spread, yes, but slower, as though my strike had bought a moment's hesitation. The entity turned fully toward me now. It loomed higher than the cavern roof should have allowed, its body bending in ways that defied anatomy. Its mouth, or what passed for one, opened impossibly wide, and the sound that came was laughter. Low, distorted, the echo of 1,000 voices finding humor in futility. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping into the hollow itself. The light beneath flared again, and for an instant I saw my own face pressed against the ice, eyes black, lips moving in silent plea. "No," I rasped, my voice ragged, barely audible against the cacophony. "You're not taking me." I swung again. The axe glanced off its ribs, sending shock through my arms. The thing didn't even flinch. Its claws shot out with impossible speed, seizing me around the torso. The cold was indescribable. Not the cold of winter air or frozen water. This was deeper. The cold of a vacuum, the void between stars. My skin burned, nerves screaming. My breath froze in my throat. It lifted me effortlessly, bringing me up to the hollow sockets of its gaze. The pale fire within seared through me, peeling back memory, thought, identity. Images burst across my vision, my childhood in Riga, my first expedition, the long, empty corridors of the station. Each memory cracked apart like ice under strain, dissolving into static. Then I heard it. Not outside, not inside, but everywhere. Almost free. The same words I'd heard on the recorder, the same promise. I realized with a clarity that cut through the terror what it wanted. The hollow wasn't just a prison. It was a seal. It needed me to break it. A vessel, a key, a living hand to finish what centuries of pressure hadn't. It pressed me downward toward the glowing fractures. My boots scraped the ice, sending sparks of light through the cracks. The bodies below thrashed harder, their mouths now chanting in unison, "Join us! Join us! Join us!" My mind buckled, my arms weakened. The axe slipped in my grip. I could feel my will draining into the thing, every beat of my heart sinking to the vibration of its presence. But then, somewhere deep inside, a memory flared. My first day at the station, standing alone after the helicopter lifted off, air so sharp it cut my lungs. That moment of defiance, of pride, of knowing I'd chosen solitude for the chance at discovery. That stubbornness, the one thing that had always carried me, ignited now. With the last of my strength, I jammed the ice axe into the crack at my feet, not at the seal. At the edge. The fracture leapt outward, but not downward. A chunk of ice gave way beneath us, collapsing into a chasm that split the cavern floor. The entity's balance faltered, its grip loosening just enough. I wrenched free and threw myself sideways as the hollow's surface heaved and splintered. The creature shrieked. Its voice was the avalanche of a mountain dying, the wail of oceans boiling. It lurched toward me, claws grasping, but the cavern gave way beneath its weight. The hollow collapsed inward, dragging it down with the writhing bodies below. I scrambled onto a ledge, clinging as tons of ice thundered downward. The glow flared brighter, then dimmer, swallowed in the collapse. For one endless second, the cavern shook as though the earth itself would split open. And then, silence. Only my ragged breathing and the faint drip of water from shattered walls. I lay there, chest heaving, every muscle trembling. My gloves were torn, skin raw, lips split and bleeding. I couldn't move, couldn't think, only breathe. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Slowly, the glow beneath the ice dimmed to nothing. The whispers faded, replaced by the empty groan of settling ice. It was over. Or so I thought. As I dragged myself to my knees, coughing blood, I reached for the flashlight. Its beam wavered across the ruined hollow, across jagged shards and darkness. And then it caught something. Not the creature. Not the bodies. A face. My face. Pressed against the ice of the far wall, eyes black, lips moving. And though no sound came, I knew exactly what it said. You didn't escape. You never will. My breath caught. The beam flickered, and the vibration began again. Faint, subtle, like a heartbeat. The vibration didn't fade. It grew. Faint at first, then steady, pulsing up through the ledge where I crouched, seeping into my bones. My chest thudded in rhythm, not my heart's beat anymore, but its. I scrambled back, boots slipping on the frost. The flashlight beam shook wildly, cutting jagged arcs across the ruined cavern. The hollow had collapsed inward, burying the bodies beneath tons of ice. The pale glow was gone, but still, something moved. Something vast, deep below. The walls moaned. Cracks snaked upward, and a groan like thunder rolled through the glacier. I realized with gut-sick clarity that I hadn't stopped it. I'd only delayed it. And if the cavern gave way completely, I would be sealed here too. Survival. The thought cut through the haze. Survival was all that mattered now. I shoved the flashlight between my teeth, palms stinging as I clawed back into the crawl tunnel I'd come from. My arms screamed with every pull, ribs aching from the earlier fall. But terror lent me strength. Behind me, the cavern rumbled, the sound of ice fracturing under pressure. The tunnel pressed close, scraping my shoulders raw. My breath fogged and froze in my face. I forced myself forward inch by inch, feeling frost shred skin beneath my gloves. Once the vibrations surged so violently, the walls squeezed tight, almost crushing me. I thought I'd be entombed right there, a new face in the ice. But then the tremor eased and the tunnel opened again. After what felt like hours, I spilled back onto the ledge where I'd first fallen. My flashlight beam caught only walls and the drop below. No sign of the creature, no sign of movement, just the endless, yawning black. I didn't linger. I scaled the narrow ridge, fingers clawing into holds, boots slipping on brittle ice. Every upward pull tore muscles, every gasp cut my lungs like glass. But higher I climbed, the faint roar of the storm above returning to my ears. Finally, blinding light. The fissure split wide, snow whipping down like knives. I heaved myself upward, body half dead, and collapsed onto the glacier's surface. The storm hadn't relented. Wind tore at me, driving snow sideways in sheets. My compass was still useless, the needle spinning in frantic circles. Orientation was gone. But the choice was simple: move or freeze where I lay. I forced myself onto my feet. Each step was agony, boots dragging through drifts, but I moved. The storm howled, visibility no more than a few meters yet behind me. I felt it. The vibration. Not faint now. Strong. Following. The ice beneath my boots trembled in long, rolling pulses. Sometimes it matched my stride, as though it were mimicking me. Other times it surged ahead, then behind, circling unseen. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I don't know how long I walked. Minutes blurred into hours. My rations were gone, my water frozen solid. I moved by will alone, my body a hollow machine. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes in the storm, tall, shrouded silhouettes that vanished when I blinked. Once I heard laughter rise above the wind, so close I whipped around, certain something was at my back. But there was only white. When my legs gave out, I fell face first into the snow. The cold embraced me instantly, soothing in its finality. My vision darkened at the edges, my breath slowing. Part of me wanted to let go, to sink, to join the others I'd seen beneath the ice. But then I saw the helicopter. At first, I thought it was another hallucination, a mirage of exhaustion. But the thump of rotors cut through the storm, growing louder. A dark shape loomed overhead, spotlight stabbing through the white. I staggered upright, waving my arms, throat tearing as I screamed. The light passed over me once, twice, then fixed. The helicopter descended, skis biting into the ice. Figures spilled out, bundled in heavy gear, voices muffled through masks. They reached me, hands gripping my arms, pulling me up. I collapsed against them, sobbing in relief I hadn't felt in years. Human touch, human voices, salvation. But even as they dragged me toward the chopper, I felt it, the vibration, stronger than ever, thudding through the glacier like the beat of a colossal heart. The rescuers didn't seem to notice. They shouted to each other over the wind, oblivious. As they hauled me into the helicopter, I looked back one last time. Through the storm, far across the ice, light pulsed. Blue-white, faint but steady, a glow rising from beneath the glacier, beating in rhythm with the vibrations. And for a moment, just before the doors slammed shut, I swore I saw something break the surface. A hand, not ice, not shadow, something becoming. The helicopter lifted, rotors hammering, and the storm fell away beneath us. I pressed my forehead against the cold window, shaking, watching the endless white stretch into eternity. My rescuers spoke around me, checked my vitals, wrapped me in blankets, their voices blurred into background noise, because I knew. It wasn't over. The glacier still pulsed, the voices still whispered, faint even over the roar of the engines. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the fear, I felt it. A rhythm. A second heartbeat, not mine. I closed my eyes, and in the silence of my skull the words returned, soft and patient, as though they had never left. Almost free. I'm Anika Vetrova, a wildlife biologist by trade, a field researcher by obsession, and, until last week, someone who believed she could measure and categorize everything in the natural world. I arrived in this stretch of the Carpathian Mountains under the guise of studying nocturnal animal patterns, though the truth is more complicated. The locals whisper of hikers vanishing without trace, of strange lights moving among the trees after dark. Curiosity, professional rigor, and a stubborn refusal to believe in the unexplainable brought me here. Now, alone, I wonder whether I've underestimated this place, or the things it hides. The forest surrounding my small camp is older than memory, the kind of forest that feels alive in the wrong way, as if it's aware of your presence. Towering pines and gnarled oaks twist skyward like fingers, their branches entwined to form a nearly impenetrable canopy. During the day, sunlight spills in through breaks in the foliage, painting mottled patterns on the mossy floor. At night, the canopy swallows everything whole. The fog rolls in thick and cold, hugging the ground and rising in curling tendrils that lick my boots. Each breath carries a sharp, earthy dampness and the faint tang of something metallic, blood, rust, I can't tell, wafts through the air. My skin pricks at it, a visceral warning that instinct whispers but my mind has not yet named. The first night, I heard it, or rather, I thought I did. A snapping twig, far off, rhythmic, deliberate. I paused mid-step, scanning the shadows with my flashlight, the beam slicing through the mist like a knife. Nothing moved. No wind stirred. My pulse slowed when I reminded myself of common forest sounds, deer, foxes, but even now, hours later, the memory sits heavy in my chest. The snapping continued intermittently, always just at the edge of hearing. I told myself it was a nocturnal animal, a wolf, perhaps a lynx. But wolves are predictable. This was different, calculated. By the second night, the forest seemed to breathe. Fog curled around my tent like a living thing, dense and wet. The occasional hoot of an owl, or what I hoped was an owl, was punctuated by strange echoes that didn't belong. Footsteps, whispering rustles of underbrush, faint at first, then closer, circling. I'd lie in my sleeping bag, heart racing, staring at the green-gray darkness beyond the tent walls, feeling watched. Every instinct screamed that something was there, just beyond vision. Observing, learning. I began noticing other oddities. My supplies shifted slightly overnight, a brush of moss that I could swear hadn't been there before, footprints in the mud too large and irregular for any local wildlife I knew. My rational mind dismissed them at first, but my sleep-deprived brain cataloged patterns that hinted at intelligence, deliberation. Whatever was here, it was clever, patient, hunting. On the third night, I left the safety of the tent to collect nocturnal sound recordings for my study. The fog was thicker, almost tangible, clinging to my legs, soaking my gloves. Each step on the leaf-littered floor felt exaggerated, like the forest itself was amplifying my presence. My recorder picked up faint cracks, whispers, low tones of breath I couldn't recognize. I stopped, listening. There it was again, a twig snapping precisely 20 feet behind me. Slow, measured. I spun, my flashlight cutting through the fog, landing on nothing. But the shadows felt wrong. Dense, dark shapes that should not exist among trees twisted in impossible angles, shifting with the mist as though they had no substance but were solid enough to disorient the mind. Something about this forest distorts the senses. The fog bends light, the shadows bend sound, and the air feels as if it's waiting, pregnant with intent. My heart thumped harder with every step, my muscles coiled for action I didn't yet understand I'd need. I reminded myself I've trained for isolation, for danger, for the unexpected. Years of fieldwork in remote ecosystems, tracking predators, surviving blizzards, evading panicked animals, should have prepared me. But this was not natural. Nothing in textbooks, journals, or anecdotes could account for the intelligence behind the presence I felt. By the fourth day, exhaustion was creeping into my bones. I stayed closer to camp, examining the edges of the fog where visibility dipped to a single meter. I marked trees for observation, checked my equipment, and cataloged anomalies. Strangely aligned rocks forming triangular patterns, broken branches placed with intent, the occasional echo that mirrored my own voice but warped, slower, as though mocking me. I began to feel the weight of being watched, not as prey, but as an experiment. Every time I stopped moving, the forest responded. Silence fell too quickly, or a breeze carried my scent back to me in a distorted swirl. And then I saw it. For just a second, a shadow slipping behind a cluster of trees, too tall, too fluid to be human, moving against the wind rather than with it. I froze. My training screamed to observe, to track, but something primal gripped my chest, a cold fist of fear. I didn't chase. I couldn't. The creature, if that's what it was, had already retreated into the fog, leaving only the impression of being measured, evaluated. I realized then this forest wasn't random, and neither was what hunted here. It learned, it adapted, and I, by remaining, had become a subject. That night, the snapping grew closer. Not lateral, not random, but precise, circling. The fog outside my tent thickened as if drawn inward by some invisible force. I heard my name whispered, though no wind carried it. Annika. The syllables were elongated, drawn out, a sound that should have been impossible for a forest to produce. I pressed my palms to my ears, telling myself I was tired, paranoid, hallucinating from isolation. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed into a dimension of perception where the rules no longer applied. Sleep was impossible. I spent hours listening, heart pounding, trying to remain rational. When I dared to peek outside, I caught a flicker of black moving against the twisted trees. Every instinct screamed retreat, but I knew one thing for certain. If I ran blindly into the forest, it would follow, adapt, and corner me. No, I would need to outthink it, to anticipate patterns, to survive with intellect instead of fear alone. By dawn, I was exhausted, shivering, but resolute. I mapped the movements I had observed, cataloged the anomalies, and prepared to face whatever watched from the fog. The forest was alive in ways I had never imagined, and I was its unwilling student. Somewhere beyond the mist it waited, silent, patient, calculating. My survival would depend on understanding it first, and I had no margin for error. I didn't sleep that night, not because of fatigue alone, but because the forest itself seemed to thrum with intent. Every snapped twig, every rustle in the mist felt like a calculated warning, a test of my resolve. By dawn, I could barely keep my hands steady as I packed my gear. I had resolved not to leave camp blindly, not until I could anticipate, even in part, the entity that stalked me. The first test came sooner than I expected. I stepped outside, boots sinking into damp moss, and immediately noticed something wrong. My tent flap, which I had carefully secured, was partially open, the fabric flapping as if brushed by invisible fingers. Inside, my journal lay splayed open, pages pressed to the ground by some unseen weight. Whoever or whatever had touched it hadn't stolen anything. It was studying me as much as I had been studying it. I swallowed a cold knot of fear and reminded myself, Observe first, react second. I crouched low, scanning the forest edges. The fog was thicker than ever, curling like smoke, but the shadows were different. They were denser, darker, moving in subtle patterns that suggested intent. And then I heard it, a faint scraping, the sound of something large shifting among the undergrowth. My heart skipped a beat, and yet my training overrode panic. I slowed my breathing, calibrated my senses, and began following the pattern, careful to leave minimal trace. The entity made its presence known deliberately. A branch snapped off to my left. I turned, flashlight cutting a swath through the fog. Nothing. But the snapping repeated, closer this time, and then a low, guttural mimic of my own voice. Annika? It wasn't the wind. It was precise, slow, mocking. I froze, realizing that this creature or force was learning, imitating, testing my reactions. I had to think like it. I couldn't outrun it. I had no weapons, no means of direct confrontation. But I had tools of observation, knowledge of predator behavior, and the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for prey to make a mistake. I crouched, listening to the fog, the shadows, the distorted echoes of my own name. Slowly, I moved, deliberately, leaving a trail of broken twigs and disturbed moss that I hoped would confuse it. It didn't take long for me to understand the rules of engagement. The entity avoided light, but not completely. It mirrored sound, but only partially, and it never revealed itself fully unless it wanted me to panic. I tested it, calling out softly, stepping into the mist with calculated hesitation. For a moment, silence, but then the snapping returned, this time forming a rough triangle around me, enclosing, circling. Panic threatened to rise, but I swallowed it. My training in fieldwork, in survival situations, and observing apex predators guided me. I began marking trees with subtle scratches, leaving small pieces of reflective material from my gear in the fog. If it was intelligent, and I was increasingly certain it was, these markers might confuse its perception of me, or they might serve as signals. Either way, I had to act, not flee blindly. Hours passed. The fog thickened into a wall, the shadows deepened, and still I was being tested. I realized the entity was not hunting randomly. It was studying me. Every step I took, every sound I made was cataloged, analyzed. It waited for mistakes, and then I made one. A soft footfall, a rock rolling under my boot. The snapping stopped. The silence pressed in, and then a shadow, tall, formless, yet impossibly solid, slid between two trees. My breath caught. It moved without bending foliage, without rustling leaves, a fluid darkness that swallowed the weak morning light. I raised my recorder, trying to capture sound, any data that might reveal patterns, but my hands trembled. The creature mimicked the clicks of my equipment, twisting them into distorted, taunting tones. I ran. Not into the forest, but along the line I had mapped, carefully, deliberately. Each step placed to minimize noise, each movement calculated to leave false cues behind. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but adrenaline sharpened my mind. The fog seemed to pulse around me, twisting shadows into shapes that almost, but not quite, revealed the entity's form. And then it struck, or more accurately, it lunged from the corner of my perception. I didn't see it fully, just the impression of darkness, moving faster than thought, brushing against my shoulder. The world distorted, sounds elongated, and I spun, swinging my flashlight. The beam caught nothing solid, only mist curling as if recoiling from heat. My pulse raced. I stumbled, but did not fall. It was here, I realized, that survival would demand improvisation. Knowledge of wildlife behavior told me that apex predators rarely attack without purpose. They test, they probe, they drive prey into error. I had to break its cycle. I grabbed a metal pole from my gear, clanging it against a tree, creating a sharp, chaotic noise. The entity paused, hesitant. I repeated the action, stepping backward into pre-laid markers, reflective tape glinting in brief flashes through the fog. The shadows recoiled, and for the first time I sensed fear, or something like it, emanating from it. I ran then, truly running, following the narrow strip of mapped forest I had marked for observation. The fog became denser, the sounds of pursuit chaotic and fragmented. Branches tore at my clothes, roots threatened to trip me, but I pushed forward, instincts honed over years of field research guiding my path. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat mattered. Hours, or what felt like hours, later I reached a clearing. Sunlight pierced the mist weakly, warm and disorienting. The shadows thinned. Silence. I collapsed, gasping, listening. Nothing moved. No echoes, no snapping, no mimicry. But the impression remained, heavy in my chest. It was still there, watching, calculating, waiting. I survived, yes. I collected data, observed patterns, documented anomalies. But I learned something crucial. This forest is not merely a collection of trees and wildlife. It is a predator itself, patient and intelligent, and whatever I faced is only one facet of its consciousness. Somewhere within the fog, it lingers, still testing, still learning, waiting for the next mistake. As I write this now, back at the edge of the mountains, the memory does not fade. The sound of snapping twigs haunts my dreams. The distorted echo of my name lingers in my ears, and I know that returning to the forest would mean facing it again. And the terrifying truth remains, it is not bound by reason, but by curiosity. And I fear, more than anything, that curiosity is patient. I thought the clearing would be safety. Sunlight filtered weakly through the canopy, and for a moment, I allowed myself a shaky breath. But I knew better. The forest had shown me patience, intelligence, and cunning. It didn't act without reason. It tested, it learned, and it adapted. And I had been under its scrutiny for days. The first mistake was my pride. I stepped into the open thinking my markers and reflective tape had thrown it off. The fog stirred, unnaturally so, curling like smoke around my boots. A shadow slid across the perimeter of the clearing, impossible in form, darker than anything natural. My pulse quickened, but I forced calm. Every step, every motion had to be deliberate. I grabbed my recorder and began playing back the distorted sounds it had created, the echoes of my own voice, the snaps of twigs, the low guttural tones. I hoped to confuse it, to make it hesitate. At first, it seemed to work. The shadows wavered, as if unsure. But then it adapted faster than I anticipated, moving in a fluid motion that defied physics. It wasn't just stalking, it was coordinating, anticipating my reactions before I could act. Panic rose, raw and cold. I ran, zigzagging between trees, swinging my flashlight, swinging the metal pole. The entity followed, mimicking sounds, twisting the fog into impossible shapes, forming multiple shadows where there was only one. My mind screamed, think like it, anticipate, improvise. But the deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to consume me, folding space in ways that disoriented my senses. I tripped on a root, sprawling to the damp forest floor. The shadow loomed, impossibly close, yet still intangible. A whisper cut through the fog, slow, deliberate. Anika. My name, drawn out, distorted, impossible. I scrambled to my feet, swinging the metal pole, striking the air, but my hands passed through darkness itself, met with nothing solid, nothing tangible. It toyed with me, testing my fear, analyzing my reactions. Then I remembered the one thing that had always kept me alive in the field, observation. Predators rely on instinct, on patterns. This was no exception. I slowed my breathing, measured my steps, and began leaving subtle cues, not for myself, but to trick it, to manipulate its learning. Rocks shifted to create false trails, reflective markers angled to bounce sunlight into the fog. I made deliberate sounds with my pole, then stopped, let the silence stretch. It reacted immediately. The shadows wavered, then darted, forming patterns I hadn't anticipated. It had learned my tactics. Every improvisation I had made only taught it more. My pulse thudded painfully. My muscles burned, but the fear that gripped me was no longer pure panic. It was calculation. Survival demanded cunning, and this time I would gamble everything. I noticed a slope leading toward a ravine, partially concealed by fog and undergrowth. Risky, dangerous, potentially fatal, but better than standing still. I sprinted, swinging my pole in wide arcs to force it to react to imaginary positions. The shadows shifted, elongated, but couldn't anticipate my path. I dove into the slope, sliding over wet leaves and tangled roots, scraping my hands and knees, lungs burning with cold air. For a fleeting moment, the fog thinned as I reached the bottom of the ravine. Silence pressed down, heavy and almost suffocating. I didn't dare look back. Somewhere above, in the trees, the entity lingered, patient. It had not attacked fully. It had taught me terror, manipulated my fear, and now waited for the next mistake. I stumbled through the underbrush for hours, following a narrow trickle of water I hoped would lead me to a road or trail. My clothes were torn, my skin bruised and bleeding, but I moved, constantly listening, constantly scanning. Occasionally, I would catch glimpses of impossibly dark forms moving at the edge of perception, never solid, never fully there, always just out of reach. It was still learning, still calculating, and I had no choice but to respect it. By dawn, I reached the forest's edge. The fog thinned enough to reveal a broken trail that led back to civilization. My hands were numb, my heart still racing. I didn't look back, though the urge was almost unbearable. The forest seemed to watch silently, unbroken by my escape, unchanged by my presence. It had observed, tested, and endured, and I knew it would do so again. Even now, as I sit outside a distant village documenting everything in my journal, the memory lingers. The snapping twigs, the distorted echoes, the shadows twisting in impossible ways, all remind me that whatever I faced is patient and intelligent. It doesn't need to hunt to prove dominance, it merely needs to exist, and fear will follow anyone who enters its domain. I survived, yes, but the forest holds its secrets tightly. Whatever it is still there. It waits in the fog, in the darkness between trees, in the space between sound and silence. I don't know if it is a creature, a force, or something beyond comprehension, and I don't want to find out by returning. The villagers tell me stories, older than memory, of travelers who never returned, of lights and shadows moving against the wind, of voices calling names in the dead of night. I listen, and I know they are true. And I know one thing more: the forest does not forget. Somewhere in the Carpathians, it watches, and it waits. I'm Anika Vetrova, a wildlife biologist by trade, a field researcher by obsession, and, until last week, someone who believed she could measure and categorize everything in the natural world. I arrived in this stretch of the Carpathian Mountains under the guise of studying nocturnal animal patterns, though the truth is more complicated. The locals whisper of hikers vanishing without trace, of strange lights moving among the trees after dark. Curiosity, professional rigor, and a stubborn refusal to believe in the unexplainable brought me here. Now alone, I wonder whether I've underestimated this place, or the things it hides. The forest surrounding my small camp is older than memory, the kind of forest that feels alive in the wrong way, as if it's aware of your presence. Towering pines and gnarled oaks twist skyward like fingers, their branches entwined to form a nearly impenetrable canopy. During the day, sunlight spills in through breaks in the foliage, painting mottled patterns on the mossy floor. At night, the canopy swallows everything whole. The fog rolls in thick and cold, hugging the ground and rising in curling tendrils that lick my boots. Each breath carries a sharp, earthy dampness, and the faint tang of something metallic, blood, rust, I can't tell, wafts through the air. My skin pricks at it, a visceral warning that instinct whispers but my mind is not yet named. The first night I heard it, or rather I thought I did. A snapping twig, far off, rhythmic, deliberate. I paused mid-step, scanning the shadows with my flashlight, the beam slicing through the mist like a knife. Nothing moved, no wind stirred. My pulse slowed when I reminded myself of common forest sounds, deer, foxes, but even now, hours later, the memory sits heavy in my chest. The snapping continued intermittently, always just at the edge of hearing. I told myself it was a nocturnal animal, a wolf, perhaps a lynx. But wolves are predictable. This was different. Calculated. By the second night, the forest seemed to breathe. Fog curled around my tent like a living thing, dense and wet. The occasional hoot of an owl, or what I hoped was an owl, was punctuated by strange echoes that didn't belong. Footsteps, whispering rustles of underbrush, faint at first, then closer, circling. I'd lie in my sleeping bag, heart racing, staring at the green-gray darkness beyond the tent walls, feeling watched. Every instinct screamed that something was there, just beyond vision, observing, learning. I began noticing other oddities. My supplies shifted slightly overnight, a brush of moss that I could swear hadn't been there before, footprints in the mud too large and irregular for any local wildlife I knew. My rational mind dismissed them at first, but my sleep-deprived brain cataloged patterns. Patterns that hinted at intelligence, deliberation. Whatever was here, it was clever. Patient. Hunting. On the third night, I left the safety of the tent to collect nocturnal sound recordings for my study. The fog was thicker, almost tangible, clinging to my legs, soaking my gloves. Each step on the leaf-littered floor felt exaggerated, like the forest itself was amplifying my presence. My recorder picked up faint cracks, whispers, low tones of breath I couldn't recognize. I stopped, listening. There it was again, a twig snapping precisely 20 feet behind me. Slow, measured. I spun, my flashlight cutting through the fog, landing on nothing. But the shadows felt wrong. Dense, dark shapes that should not exist among trees, twisted in impossible angles, shifting with the mist as though they had no substance but were solid enough to disorient the mind. Something about this forest distorts the senses. The fog bends light, the shadows bend sound, and the air feels as if it's waiting, pregnant with intent. My heart thumped harder with every step, my muscles coiled for action I didn't yet understand I'd need. I reminded myself, I've trained for isolation, for danger, for the unexpected. But this was not natural. Nothing in textbooks, journals, or anecdotes could account for the intelligence behind the presence I felt. By the fourth day, exhaustion was creeping into my bones. I stayed closer to camp, examining the edges of the fog where visibility dipped to a single meter. I marked trees for observation, checked my equipment, and cataloged anomalies. Strangely aligned rocks forming triangular patterns, broken branches placed with intent, the occasional echo that mirrored my own voice but warped, slower, as though mocking me. I began to feel the weight of being watched, not as prey but as an experiment. Every time I stopped moving, the forest responded. Silence fell too quickly, or a breeze carried my scent back to me in a distorted swirl. And then I saw it. For just a second, a shadow slipping behind a cluster of trees, too tall, too fluid to be human, moving against the wind rather than with it. I froze. My training screamed to observe, to track, but something primal gripped my chest. A cold fist of fear. I didn't chase. I couldn't. The creature, if that's what it was, had already retreated into the fog, leaving only the impression of being measured, evaluated. I realized then this forest wasn't random, and neither was what hunted here. It learned. It adapted. And I, by remaining, had become a subject. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fatigue alone, but because the forest itself seemed to thrum with intent. Every snapped twig, every rustle in the mist, felt like a calculated warning, a test of my resolve. By dawn, I could barely keep my hands steady as I packed my gear. I had resolved not to leave camp blindly, not until I could anticipate, even in part, the entity that stalked me. The first test came sooner than I expected. I stepped outside, boots sinking into damp moss, and immediately noticed something wrong. My tent flap, which I had carefully secured, was partially open, the fabric flapping as if brushed by invisible fingers. Inside my journal lay splayed open, pages pressed to the ground by some unseen weight. Whoever or whatever had touched it hadn't stolen anything. It was studying me as much as I had been studying it. I swallowed a cold knot of fear and reminded myself, observe first, react second. I crouched low, scanning the forest edges. The fog was thicker than ever, curling like smoke, but the shadows were different. They were denser, darker, moving in subtle patterns that suggested intent. And then I heard it. A faint scraping. The sound of something large shifting among the undergrowth. My heart skipped a beat, and yet my training overrode panic. I slowed my breathing, calibrated my senses, and began following the pattern, careful to leave minimal trace. The entity made its presence known deliberately. A branch snapped off to my left. I turned, flashlight cutting a swath through the fog. Nothing. But the snapping repeated, closer this time, and then a low, guttural mimic of my own voice. Anika. It wasn't the wind. It was precise, slow, mocking. I froze, realizing that this creature or force was learning, imitating, testing my reactions. I had to think like it. I couldn't outrun it. I had no weapons, no means of direct confrontation. But I had tools of observation, knowledge of predator behavior, and the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for prey to make a mistake. I crouched, listening to the fog, the shadows, the distorted echoes of my own name. Slowly, I moved deliberately, leaving a trail of broken twigs and disturbed moss that I hoped would confuse it. It didn't take long for me to understand the rules of engagement. The entity avoided light, but not completely. It mirrored sound, but only partially, and it never revealed itself fully unless it wanted me to panic. I tested it, calling out softly, stepping into the mist with calculated hesitation. For a moment, silence, but then the snapping returned, this time forming a rough triangle around me, enclosing, circling. Panic threatened to rise, but I swallowed it. My training in fieldwork, in survival situations, in observing apex predators guided me. I began marking trees with subtle scratches, leaving small pieces of reflective material from my gear in the fog. If it was intelligent, and I was increasingly certain it was, these markers might confuse its perception of me, or they might serve as signals. Either way, I had to act, not flee blindly. Hours passed. The fog thickened into a wall, the shadows deepened, and still, I was being tested. I realized the entity was not hunting randomly. It was studying me. Every step I took, every sound I made was cataloged, analyzed. It waited for mistakes, and then I made one. A soft footfall, a rock rolling under my boot. The snapping stopped, the silence pressed in. And then a shadow, tall, formless, yet impossibly solid, slid between two trees. My breath caught. It moved without bending foliage, without rustling leaves, a fluid darkness that swallowed the weak morning light. I raised my recorder, trying to capture sound, any data that might reveal patterns, but my hands trembled. The creature mimicked the clicks of my equipment, twisting them into distorted, taunting tones. I ran. Not into the forest, but along the line I had mapped carefully, deliberately. Each step placed to minimize noise, each movement calculated to leave false cues behind. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but adrenaline sharpened my mind. The fog seemed to pulse around me, twisting shadows into shapes that almost, but not quite, revealed the entity's form. I tripped on a root, sprawling to the damp forest floor. The shadow loomed, impossibly close yet still intangible. A whisper cut through the fog, slow, deliberate. Annika. My name drawn out, distorted, impossible. I scrambled to my feet, swinging the metal pole, striking the air, but my hands passed through darkness itself, met with nothing solid, nothing tangible. It toyed with me, testing my fear, analyzing my reactions. Then I remembered the one thing that had always kept me alive in the field: observation. Predators rely on instinct, on patterns. This was no exception. I slowed my breathing, measured my steps, and began leaving subtle cues. Not for myself, but to trick it, to manipulate its learning. Rocks shifted to create false trails, reflective markers angled to bounce sunlight into the fog. I made deliberate sounds with my pole, then stopped, let the silence stretch. It reacted immediately. The shadows wavered, then darted, forming patterns I hadn't anticipated. It had learned my tactics. Every improvisation I had made only taught it more. My pulse thudded painfully, my muscles burned, but the fear that gripped me was no longer pure panic. It was calculation. Survival demanded cunning, and this time, I would gamble everything. I noticed a slope leading toward a ravine, partially concealed by fog and undergrowth. Risky, dangerous, potentially fatal, but better than standing still. I sprinted, swinging my pole in wide arcs to force it to react to imaginary positions. The shadows shifted, elongated, but couldn't anticipate my path. I dove into the slope, sliding over wet leaves and tangled roots, scraping my hands and knees, lungs burning with cold air. For a fleeting moment, the fog thinned as I reached the bottom of the ravine. Silence pressed down, heavy and almost suffocating. I didn't dare look back. Somewhere above, in the trees, the entity lingered, patient. It had not attacked fully. It had taught me terror, manipulated my fear, and now waited for the next mistake. I stumbled through the underbrush for hours, following a narrow trickle of water I hoped would lead me to a road or trail. My clothes were torn, my skin bruised and bleeding, but I moved, constantly listening, constantly scanning. Occasionally, I would catch glimpses of impossibly dark forms moving at the edge of perception. Never solid, never fully there, always just out of reach. It was still learning, still calculating, and I had no choice but to respect it. By dawn, I reached the forest's edge. The fog thinned enough to reveal a broken trail that led back to civilization. My hands were numb, my heart still racing. I didn't look back, though the urge was almost unbearable. The forest seemed to watch silently, unbroken by my escape, unchanged by my presence. It had observed, tested, and endured, and I knew it would do so again. Even now, as I sit outside a distant village, documenting everything in my journal, the memory lingers. The snapping twigs, the distorted echoes, the shadows twisting in impossible ways, all remind me that whatever I faced is patient and intelligent. It doesn't need to hunt to prove dominance, it merely needs to exist, and fear will follow anyone who enters its domain. I survived, yes, but the forest holds its secrets tightly. Whatever it is still there. It waits in the fog, in the darkness between trees, in the space between sound and silence. I don't know if it is a creature, a force, or something beyond comprehension. And I don't want to find out by returning. The villagers tell me stories older than memory of travelers who never returned, of lights and shadows moving against the wind, of voices calling names in the dead of night. I listen, and I know they are true. And I know one thing more. The forest does not forget. Somewhere in the Carpathians, it watches, and it waits. My name is Captain Rafael Dominguez, and I wasn't supposed to be here alone. I was hired out of Mexico City 6 months ago, flown halfway across the world to guard a team of scientists who thought they could brave Siberia's interior in January. My record made me their first choice. 12 years in GAFE, counterinsurgency, border operations, mountain warfare. They didn't want a babysitter. They wanted a soldier who knew how to handle death. I told them the cold kills more efficiently than bullets. They laughed. Scientists always think they've solved nature by writing about it. The helicopter went down 3 days ago. Engine failure, whiteout, a howl of wind that rattled my teeth before the rotors stopped biting air. When I came to, the wreckage was half buried in snow. Twisted metal, black smoke clawing at the sky. I crawled free. I didn't see the scientists again. Maybe they burned. Maybe the snow swallowed them. Now it's just me. The taiga is a world of silence, but not empty. The cold is alive. It presses against your skull, gnaws on your lungs. Every tree is black and skeletal, every branch a knife. The snow squeaks under boots, and each exhale feels like glass breaking in my throat. I've set up a crude shelter using the Rex insulation and bent aluminum, but the forest doesn't sleep. Not really. At night, the wind whistles through the broken fuselage and sounds like someone sobbing. Last night, I heard my name, Rafael, carried soft across the trees. None of the scientists knew Spanish. This morning, the tracks appeared. Boot prints. Not mine. Parallel to where I scouted for firewood about 30 meters out. Crisp, deep impressions in the snow. Someone was walking barefoot, and yet the print was perfect. Every toe, every line of the sole. Human. Too human. I raised my rifle. My hands didn't shake. Years of training kick in when fear tries to loosen your grip, but my stomach burned with a cold older than war. I followed the trail for 50 meters before it ended in the middle of a clearing. Just stopped. Like whoever left it had stepped straight into the sky. The silence after that discovery was worse than the wind. That was the first time I admitted something else survived the crash. Not human. And it wanted me to know it was here. The worst mistake a soldier can make in enemy territory is assuming he understands the rules of engagement. Here, the rules are different. I've fought insurgents who knew how to vanish into mountains, drug runners who dug tunnels beneath borders, but they were men. Predictable, breakable. What stalked me in the Siberian forest wasn't bound by human limits. It wanted me cautious. It wanted me afraid. and it was working. I spent the next day rationing melted snow and dried rations salvaged from the wreck. The cold gnawed at my stomach faster than hunger. I kept my rifle close, fingers numb but disciplined, the way I was trained. Never point without intent, never waste ammunition. I counted 19 rounds left. Every sound pressed against my skull. Crack of a branch could be snow. Whistle of wind could be a voice. My training told me to catalog, analyze, remain calm. But instinct whispered, "You are prey here." By sunset, the taiga turned into a black ocean. The snow caught the last orange light, glowing faintly while the trees swallowed everything else. I built a small fire in the wreck, its smoke trailing through a hole in the fuselage. The heat barely kissed my skin, but it was enough to fight back the shivers. That was when I heard the static. It came faintly at first, like a broken walkie-talkie coughing to life. A voice stuttered through the crackle, not words, but syllables. Ra, El. My blood iced. The radios had all burned in the crash. I'd checked, nothing worked. I rose, rifle in hand, ears straining. The sound wasn't coming from inside the wreck. It was outside, threading through the trees, as if the forest itself was coughing signals. I did what instinct demanded. I shut off the fire, pressed my back to the aluminum shell, and listened. For a minute, silence. Then, footsteps. Crunch. Slow, deliberate. Snow compressing under weight. They circled just beyond the tree line. Whoever, or whatever it was, it wanted me to hear. I should have stayed hidden. Any survival manual will tell you, don't engage what you don't understand. But soldiers are not manuals. We are wired to control the battlefield, not sit and wait for the inevitable. I flicked my safety off, steadied my breath, and stepped into the night. The forest swallowed me whole. My fire was a faint glow behind me, like a dying star. Snow creaked under my boots. Raphael, the voice again clearer. A woman's voice this time. My chest tightened, not because I recognized it, because I didn't. I moved toward the sound, rifle raised. My boots sank deep, each step cautious, deliberate. The taiga seemed endless, a wall of birch and pine stretching in every direction. The voice floated closer, softer, almost pleading. Raphael. I stopped. There were prints in the snow again, bare feet, impossibly clear in the frost. I tracked them, rifle steady until the trees opened into another small clearing, and that's when I saw her. A figure stood 10 meters ahead, pale skin glowing in moonlight. Long black hair plastered against her face with frost. She wore no clothes, no shoes, yet the cold didn't touch her. Her arms hung limp, her head tilted as if her neck had forgotten how to carry it. Her eyes, Christ, her eyes were blank. Not blind, not closed, but empty, like frost had eaten whatever had once lived inside. And when she spoke my name again, her lips never moved. I didn't fire. I should have. I had a clean shot. But every survival instinct warred against my training. My muscles locked. Something about her presence told me bullets would only prove how powerless I was. Then she smiled. Not wide, not human, just a slow curl of the lips, cold and deliberate. And she turned, walking backward into the trees, her bare feet pressing into snow without sinking. I don't remember the walk back to the wreck. My memory skips like a corrupted tape. I know I ran. My breath tore my chest raw. My hands shook against the rifle. When I stumbled back inside the fuselage, I barricaded the entrance with scraps of metal until dawn smeared gray across the trees. That morning, the tracks were gone. My own prints still scarred the snow, but hers, the perfect bare footprints, had vanished as if the forest had inhaled them overnight. I didn't sleep again. By the third day, paranoia became procedure. I stopped moving far from the wreck. Every hour, I checked perimeter lines I'd scratched into the snow, scanning for tracks. I rationed firewood, melted ice inside instead of venturing out. Still, the voices came. Sometimes they were whispers, like men murmuring just beyond sight. Sometimes they were clearer, an officer barking orders in Spanish, as if from my old squad. Once I swore I heard my mother calling me home for dinner. The mimicry wasn't random, it was personal. It was digging into me, peeling me open to see how deep my fear ran. On the fourth night, it changed tactics. I woke to silence, too deep, too perfect. The wind had stopped, even the trees held their breath. Then metal groaned. Not the wreck's natural settling, no. This was pressure. Weight dragging along the fuselage, a hand, fingernails on steel. I froze, rifle clutched to my chest, pulse a drum in my ears. Scrape. Slow. Testing. And then 3 knocks, deliberate, rhythmic, on the aluminum just above my head. Knock, knock, knock. I broke. Who's there? My voice came out raw, cracked, a soldier screaming into the abyss. Silence answered. For a full minute, nothing. Then laughter. It wasn't loud, it wasn't manic, just a low chuckle right outside the fuselage, circling as though whoever laughed was dragging their mouth along the wreck while doing it. My rifle trembled in my hands. I wanted to fire, but where? At what? At emptiness? When dawn came, there were no prints in the snow. Not one. I realized something then, something I didn't want to believe. It wasn't just stalking me. It was studying me, and the longer I survived, the closer it came. By the 5th day, my discipline was unraveling. Special Forces training teaches you how to fight exhaustion, how to trick the mind into pushing through hunger, cold, and fear. But no course, no drill sergeant, no battlefield prepares you for an enemy that won't reveal itself. The forest didn't want me dead. Not yet. It wanted me worn down, hollowed out. I had 19 rounds left. 19 chances to remind myself I still had power. But power without a target is just weight. That morning, the voices were gone. No whispers, no static, not even the familiar groan of the wind. The silence pressed in on me like a coffin. When the sun rose, dim and weak, through a sheet of gray cloud, I forced myself to scout. Sitting still meant death, either from starvation or from whatever was hunting me. My body was stiff, muscles sluggish with cold, but my rifle was steady. I moved carefully, sweeping my surroundings in tight arcs, checking every angle like I was clearing a room. Snow crunched, trees loomed, my breath fogged in front of me. Then I saw it, a figure, far between the birch trunks. It wasn't the woman this time, it was a soldier. He stood still, about 40 meters out, half concealed by branches. Uniform, dark green, padded jacket, fur hat. He looked Russian, broad-shouldered. A Kalashnikov hung from his chest. For a moment, my heart lifted. Rescue? Patrol? Siberia still had rangers, didn't it? I raised a hand. "Oi, hey!" The soldier didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even tilt his head. I shouted louder, my voice cracking against the trees. "I'm here! Crash site, helicopter, I need assistance!" Still nothing. That's when I noticed his feet, bare, sinking into the snow as if the cold didn't exist. Every instinct screamed. I dropped to one knee, rifle leveled. Through my sights, I saw his face clearly for the first time, and my stomach turned to stone. It was my face, not exactly. A mirror image, but wrong in ways too subtle and too brutal. The jaw hung slightly off-center, like broken bone had healed wrong. The eyes were milky, clouded, but fixed on me with unnatural focus. The mouth curved, not in recognition, not in hostility, just a small, patient smile. "Raphael?" it said. My voice. Perfect. I fired. The round split the silence with a crack that shook the trees. The figure jerked back, a spray of dark mist bursting from its shoulder. It staggered, but didn't fall. I fired again, this time center mass. Another impact, another burst, but no blood, no collapse. Just that same smile widening, wider than a human mouth should. I emptied 5 rounds before I realized it wasn't dying. Then it moved. Not ran, not walked. It glided like gravity hadn't remembered to grab it. 1 second it was 40 meters away. The next, 20. No tracks between. I stumbled back, cold flooding my veins. My training screamed, tactical retreat, regroup, but survival overrode everything. I fired again, blind, the recoil hammering my shoulder. The bullets tore through it, but the thing didn't slow. When it opened its mouth, the sound was a chorus. Dozens of voices layered together. The scientists, my squad mates, my mother, the woman's whisper. All at once. I ran. Branches tore at my face, snow collapsed beneath my boots. I didn't care. I sprinted for the wreck like a rookie breaking formation. Behind me, the voices followed, overlapping, chasing me through the forest. "Raphael, don't run. Raphael, come home. Captain, behind you." I burst back into the clearing, heart clawing up my throat, and dove inside the fuselage. My hands moved on muscle memory, barricade, reload, safety off. My breath came in ragged gasps, white clouds choking the cold air. The laughter started again, low, guttural, circling. Fingernails on steel, this time faster, sharper, like claws testing the metal's strength. I pressed my forehead to the rifle's stock, eyes squeezed shut. I whispered to myself like I had in combat zones. Stay alive. Outlast. Find weakness. For hours, minutes, eternities, the sound prowled the wreck. Scraping, tapping, chuckling, then silence. When I finally dared to look, dawn had returned. My rounds were down to 12. I'd wounded it. No, not wounded. I'd disrupted it. The black mist wasn't blood, but it reacted to gunfire. That meant it wasn't invincible. That meant there were rules. I just had to learn them before it learned me. That day, I set traps. Primitive, desperate, but they gave me purpose. Deadfall branches rigged above narrow paths. Sharp metal from the fuselage buried beneath snow. Noise lines with empty cans strung from wiring. My hands shook the entire time. Not from cold, not from exhaustion, from the gnawing certainty that it was watching. By nightfall, the forest hadn't made a sound. Too quiet. I sat by my fire, rifle across my knees, staring into the shadows, and then the radio crackled again. Dominguez, this is command. Do you copy? My chest seized. Spanish. Military tone. The exact clipped cadence I'd grown up obeying. Command, this is Captain Dominguez, Gayfie. Downed helicopter, Siberian wilderness. Survivors unknown. I need immediate evac. My voice trembled, but procedure steadied it. Static. Then copy that, Captain. Hold position. Extraction inbound. ETA, 30 minutes. Relief burst inside me. My eyes stung. My hands almost dropped the rifle. 30 minutes. I could last 30 minutes. But then, Dominguez, the radio said again, softer now, warped. Don't run this time. And the laughter bled through the static. I hurled the radio into the fire. Sparks exploded. My chest heaved with fury. It was learning faster than me, and it was inside my head now, using my chain of command against me. That night, the thing didn't scratch, didn't laugh, didn't speak. It knocked. Not 3 times. Not random. 19. 1 knock for every bullet I had left. 19 knocks. I counted each one in the dark, pressed against the fuselage wall with my rifle across my chest. They echoed like hammer blows against my skull. 19. No more, no less. When the last knock faded, I realized my teeth were clenched so tight my jaw ached. It knew. Somehow, it knew exactly how many rounds I had left. That night, I didn't sleep. When the pale gray dawn filtered through the wreck, I made a decision. Hiding wasn't survival anymore. It was surrender. If this thing wanted me dead, it would have done it the first night. No, it was playing with me. And if it was playing, then maybe I could use that arrogance against it. I scavenged every last piece of wreckage that could be weaponized. Shards of aluminum bent into crude blades, wiring coiled into snares, sections of jagged fuselage buried under snow like punji stakes. My hands were stiff and bleeding from cold, but I kept working, jaw locked, breath fogging the air like smoke. I set my traps along the perimeter of my camp, circles within circles, noise lines with cans, deadfalls balanced over narrow choke points, even crude tripwires. Each move felt familiar, like prepping ambushes in the mountains back home. Except in Mexico, I knew who my enemy was. Here I didn't even know if it had a body that could bleed. But I knew one thing. It reacted to me firing on it. The mist, the staggering, something in it resisted bullets. And if it resisted, it could be forced. By midday, I was patrolling the perimeter, rifle up, listening. Always listening. The silence was different now. Before, it was empty. Now it was waiting. That was when the first can rattled. I spun, sight up, breath steady. A string of aluminum tins clattered softly 30 meters to the north. Snow crunched. Deliberate. Testing. Come on, I whispered. The trees shifted. Between the birches, something moved, a shape, humanoid, flickering like bad film reel. I leveled my rifle, finger brushing the trigger, and then it spoke. Captain, the voice of my old commander. Exact, sharp, the tone that had barked orders at me for a decade. Stand down. You're disoriented, friendly approaching. For a moment, just a fraction, I faltered. Training is hardwired. Orders are reflex. That hesitation nearly killed me. The figure stepped into the clearing, uniform, JAFE insignia on the chest, my own unit patch. He carried himself like a soldier, boots crunching, rifle at the low ready. But his eyes, Christ, the eyes gave him away. Empty, milked over, too wide. I fired. The first round punched through its torso. Mist burst like smoke. It staggered back. The second round cracked its shoulder. It twisted unnaturally, but the face kept staring at me, lips curling in a grotesque smile. It rushed forward, faster than a sprint, a blur of limbs. That's when it hit the snare. The wire whipped tight around its ankle. The figure jerked, toppled sideways into the snow with an unnatural shriek. Not human, not animal. Something stretched and broken. I didn't waste time. I fired 3 more rounds, center mass. Mist sprayed in thick clouds, evaporating into the air. The body convulsed, spasmed, then dissolved, unraveling like smoke in a strong wind, and then it was gone. Just snow, just trees, just silence. I stood there, chest heaving, rifle trembling in my grip. I waited for more movement. Another shape, another voice. Nothing. Only the wire snare, swinging gently where something had been. I wanted to believe I'd heard it, that the traps worked, but deep down I knew. That was just one mask, just one skin it wore. It wasn't dead. It couldn't be. That night, the voices didn't come. No laughter, no static, no footsteps, only silence. The kind of silence that means retreat, or patience. I forced myself to eat dried meat, frozen, hard, but chewable if I held it in my mouth long enough. My hands shook even as I raised it. Victory didn't taste like anything but fear. I tried to convince myself I'd won something. Time, at least. But soldiers learn quick. The enemy adapts. And this one adapted faster than anything I'd ever seen. The 6th day brought proof. At dawn, I stepped outside to check the traps. The snow was pristine, no tracks, no disturbances. But the cans, the ones strung on my noise lines, were gone. Every single one. Not broken, not scattered. Just missing, as if someone had lifted them off the wire and carried them away. I froze, scanning the trees. My throat tightened. The forest exhaled, and from somewhere deep between the trunks, 100 cans rattled at once. The sound surrounded me, a metallic chorus, clinking and clattering in every direction. It wasn't random, it was mocking. I fell back to the wreck, rifle sweeping arcs, pulse pounding. The sound followed, shifting trees to trees, echoing until I couldn't tell where it began or ended. And then, clear as daylight, my own voice called out. Trap set, perimeter secure, ready for extraction. The exact words I'd muttered the night before. Repeated back to me in perfect tone. The forest was memorizing me. That night, it came closer than ever. I woke to the groan of metal bending under weight. My eyes snapped open to see frost drifting from the fuselage ceiling. Something heavy pressed down from above, snow sifting through cracks. I raised my rifle, heart slamming. The ceiling buckled. A hand punched through, long fingers, skin gray-blue with frost, nails black and sharp. I fired instinctively. The ceiling exploded in splinters of aluminum, mist burst, spraying cold across my face. The hand recoiled, vanishing into the night. Then, silence. But I could hear it breathing, above me, around me, everywhere. I didn't sleep again. Couldn't. I sat with my rifle pressed to my chest, eyes burning, ears straining for every shift in the air. The 7th day dawned, pale and weak, and I knew one thing with absolute certainty. It wasn't trying to kill me outright. It could have crushed the fuselage while I slept. It could have torn me apart with those claws. No, it wanted me broken, hollow, a body with no fight left. And if I didn't find a way out soon, it would get exactly what it wanted. By the 7th dawn, my body was failing. The wreck had become a coffin. Steel walls sweating frost, the air inside so cold it stung to breathe. Every breath burned my lungs, every step throbbed through my bones. My rations were gone, except for scraps, and melting snow only postponed the dehydration clawing at my skull. I couldn't wait anymore. If I stayed, I would starve. If I left, I might die faster. But there's a difference between waiting for death and meeting it head-on. One I could accept, the other I couldn't. So I packed. What did packing mean? Stranded in the Siberian taiga? A rifle with 12 rounds. A jagged piece of aluminum wrapped in cloth as a makeshift blade. My canteen, half full with melted snow. and a strip of canvas torn from the wreck to wrap around my shoulders against the wind. That was all. I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring into the black wall of trees. The forest loomed, thick and endless, a labyrinth made of pine and birch and shadow. Move, I whispered to myself, before it moves you, and I stepped inside. The snow was deep, swallowing my boots up to the ankles. Every step cracked like bone beneath ice. My breath fogged, trailing behind me like a beacon. I tried to keep my pace steady, slow, deliberate, sweeping my rifle to every angle. I marked the trees with the aluminum blade, carving sharp lines into their bark, a breadcrumb trail, a soldier's way of refusing to vanish. Hours blurred. The sun shifted weakly overhead, a pale coin behind the clouds. My muscles screamed with cold, my thoughts blurred into fragments. Left, check, carve, move. And then I reached another clearing. At first, relief, open ground, visibility, I could rest. But when I scanned the edges, my stomach turned to stone. The clearing wasn't empty. It was full of cans, hundreds of them. My noise-line traps stolen from the wreck, hung from branches, balanced on snow, piled into crude towers. They clinked softly in the wind, a metallic forest grown inside the real one. I staggered forward, disbelieving. I kicked one tower, it toppled, cans scattering with hollow clangs. And then, like a recording on loop, the air around me filled with sound. My voice. Perimeter secure. Perimeter secure. Perimeter secure. Over and over. Panic clawed at my chest. I spun, carving another mark into a birch, trying to force logic back into my head. Just move. Just keep moving. I stumbled through the clearing, cans rattling at my boots, the echoes overlapping until I couldn't tell if the voices were outside or inside my skull. By the time I broke through to the next line of trees, my hands were trembling so hard I nearly dropped the rifle. That was when I saw it. The tree, it wasn't like the others. The trunk was wide, gnarled, scarred with frost, but it was the markings that froze me, marks that weren't mine. Dozens of slashes in the bark, deep and uneven, circling the trunk from the ground up to eye level. I stepped closer, heart pounding. They weren't random. They were familiar. They were my marks. The same sharp cuts I'd been carving all morning. I pressed my hand to the trunk, fingers fitting perfectly into the grooves, and my stomach dropped into a void. I hadn't been moving forward. I'd been circling. The forest had folded me into itself, a trap not of metal or wire, but of terrain. I staggered back, rifle slipping from my grip for half a second. My throat was raw when I screamed into the trees. "Show yourself!" The echo came back at once, my voice. Perfect. From every direction. "Show yourself! Show yourself! Show yourself!" And then, quieter, softer, from directly behind me. "Show yourself!" I spun, rifle up, finger hammering the trigger. The forest cracked with gunfire, snow exploded from a trunk, splinters flew, my ears rang, my shoulder jolted with recoil, but nothing fell, nothing bled, only laughter. It rippled through the trees, layered and endless, a sound that wasn't aimed to scare but to mock. I collapsed against the marked tree, chest heaving, vision swimming. My rounds were down to 8. My body was breaking, and the forest, whatever it was tightening around me like a snare. I tried again. I don't know how long I walked. Minutes, hours. My legs dragged, my breath burned. Every tree I carved showed the same thing, marks already there. My marks, again and again. At one point, I dropped to my knees in the snow, pressing my face into the frozen earth, willing myself to wake up, to break out of whatever loop this was. But when I looked up, the clearing waited. The wreck. The same clearing I had left at dawn. I had gone in a perfect circle. The fuselage sat silent, half buried in frost. My barricades still stood. My footprints were the only ones breaking the snow. No rescue, no patrol, no way out. I stumbled inside, throat burning, and slammed the barricade shut. My body shook uncontrollably. My mind felt split in two, the soldier calculating options and the man realizing there were none. The laughter returned as night fell. Not outside this time. Inside. Soft, low, whispering from the corners of the wreck like frost itself was giggling. I clamped my hands over my ears. I rocked back and forth on the frozen floor, whispering to myself like a prayer. Stay alive. Outlast. Stay alive. But my own whisper was drowned out, because the forest had learned it too, and it whispered it back. Stay alive. Outlast. Stay alive. By the 8th day, the line between waking and dreaming had blurred. I don't know how many hours I slept, if I slept at all. My eyes would close, and I'd see the faces of my squad, of my mother, of the scientists who'd screamed when the helicopter split apart. Then I'd open my eyes, and they'd still be there, faint outlines pressed against the fuselage walls like frost patterns that almost looked human. I ate the last of my rations, chewed them until my jaw ached, swallowed though my throat felt raw and torn. The food gave me nothing. My body was empty fuel lines, and the voices wouldn't stop. They didn't come in sudden bursts anymore. They dripped, constant, low, like water seeping through cracks in rock, a slow erosion of the mind. Stay alive. Outlast. Captain. Raphael. Always my name. Always mine. At some point, I realized I wasn't alone in the fuselage. I looked up from my hands, cracked and bleeding from cold, and saw them, shapes seated across from me. Soldiers, 4 of them, in full gear, rifles slung, eyes staring. My old unit. They didn't speak. They didn't breathe. They just sat as if waiting for orders. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes until they watered. They were still there. Martinez, I croaked, pointing at one of them. You died in Michoacan. He didn't answer. His face didn't change. I looked at the others. I remembered every one of their deaths. Bullets, shrapnel, fire. None of them should have been sitting in the wreck with me. But they were. I raised my rifle, hands trembling. Not real, I whispered. You're not real. And yet my finger refused to pull the trigger. Because what if somehow I was wrong? The silence stretched. The 4 of them sat like statues. Then together they tilted their heads. Same angle, same movement. And in the same voice, my voice, they spoke. Join. I screamed and fired. The rifle bucked, deafening in the confined wreck. Frost and splinters burst from the wall where their faces had been. When the smoke cleared, nothing. Just empty steel. I dropped the rifle. My chest heaved, my vision tunneled. The laughter bloomed again, this time inside my skull. Not outside, not circling. Inside. A chorus of voices layered under my thoughts, weaving with them until I couldn't tell which were mine. The hunger made it worse. The snow I melted gave me water, but it didn't stop the hollow pain that gnawed at my gut. My limbs felt weak, my hands clumsy. I thought about eating bark. I thought about eating leather from my boots. I even stared at my own hands for too long, imagining stripping skin. That was when the smell came. Warm, oily, meat cooking over fire. My stomach clenched so hard I gagged. The wreck filled with the scent, thick, rich, impossible. I crawled to the fuselage opening, shoving the barricade aside with frantic strength. The cold hit me like a hammer, but the smell was stronger outside. Smoke curled between the trees, orange glow flickered, firelight. My heart thundered. I stumbled toward it, rifle half dragging in my numb grip. The fire burned in a clearing 20 meters from the wreck. Meat roasted on a spit, sizzling fat dripping into flames. The smell made my mouth flood, my stomach twist. I staggered closer, dizzy with need. Then I saw what was cooking. It was a hand. Blackened, charred, the fingers curling as fat melted from them. The fire hissed with the sound of burning flesh, and sitting by the flames was myself. He looked stronger, cleaner, his uniform intact, his eyes clear. He turned the spit slowly, smiling as if greeting an old friend. Hungry? He asked in my voice. I raised my rifle. My hands shook so violently the barrel wavered across his chest. What do you want? I rasped. He chuckled. Not mocking, not cruel. Gentle, almost. Not want. Need. You've always belonged here, Raphael. Just let go. He turned the spit again, the charred hand dripping into the fire, and then he looked me in the eye and said, You've been here before. I fired. The bullet tore through his skull. Mist erupted, billowing like smoke. His body collapsed into ash that scattered across the snow. The fire guttered out with a hiss. The smell of meat vanished. I stood in the clearing, gasping, body shaking with fury and fear. My rifle was down to 7 rounds. 7. I staggered back to the wreck, falling to my knees inside. My chest heaved, my vision swam, but the words clung like ice in my head. You've been here before. That night, I dreamed, or maybe I didn't, maybe I simply remembered. I was back in the helicopter, strapped in as the scientists whispered nervously. The rotors thundered overhead, the cold seeped through the glass. Then the crash, the fire, the screaming. But this time, when I looked out the broken window, I saw myself standing in the snow, watching, waiting, smiling. I woke with frost caked on my beard and tears frozen to my face. The voices were louder than ever. Not outside now, not inside, both, surrounding me, threading through my thoughts, choking me. Stay alive. Outlast. Join. You've been here before. The wreck groaned. Frost cracked. Shadows shifted along the walls, and then hands pressed through the metal. Dozens of them. Fingers, palms, nails. Pushing inward as if the fuselage was soft clay. I scrambled back, rifle up, heart exploding in my chest. The hands didn't grab. They didn't claw. They beckoned. I don't know if I screamed light. I don't know if I fired. All I know is that the forest didn't want me dead. It wanted me added. I didn't sleep again. Couldn't. The hands pressed against the fuselage walls all night, sometimes dozens, sometimes just one, dragging slow trails across the frost-coated steel. They never pulled me. They never struck. They only beckoned, patient and relentless. When dawn came, weak gray light bleeding into the wreck, I knew staying meant surrender. My body was brittle glass, my mind cracked stone, but something inside me still screamed, move. So I moved. I loaded the last 7 rounds into the rifle, chambered one, and slung the makeshift blade across my back. I shoved the barricade aside, the metal shrieking, and stepped into the snow. The forest was waiting. Silent. Still. A wall of trunks and branches and white that felt more solid than steel. I muttered to myself a mantra, forward, don't stop, forward, and I walked. The cold gnawed deeper than ever. It wasn't weather anymore, it was intention. Like the air itself, pressed heavy, biting through my canvas wrap, clawing into my marrow. I carved marks into trees again, not for direction, for defiance. I was here, I fought. Every mark was a refusal to disappear. Hours, minutes, time didn't exist. At one point, I stumbled into a gully, half-frozen stream at its bottom. The water gurgled faintly under the ice, a sound almost comforting in its normalcy. I broke through with the butt of the rifle, scooped water into my canteen, gulped until my teeth ached with cold. When I looked up, I saw myself staring back from the opposite bank. Not the soldier double, not the smiling version by the fire. This one looked gaunt, hollow-eyed, ribs showing through a torn uniform. It was me, if I lasted another week. It didn't speak. It just raised its rifle, my rifle, and aimed at me. I fired first. The bullet shattered ice, sprayed water, and the figure dissolved like steam. I was down to 6 rounds. The sun sagged toward the horizon, smothered by gray. I forced myself forward until my legs buckled, and I dropped to my knees in the snow. When I looked up, my heart shattered. The clearing, the wreck. Again, I had walked in another circle. Rage exploded out of me. I screamed until my throat tore, slammed my fists into the frozen earth, pounded until my knuckles split. Enough! Do you hear me? Basta! Kill me, damn you! The forest answered, with applause, slow, rhythmic, 100 hands clapping from the trees. I fell silent, shivering, rifle trembling in my grip. The sound swelled, overlapping, until it became laughter again. My laughter, high and ragged, thrown back at me from every direction. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. A voice cut through the silence, calm, measured, close. Captain Dominguez, I froze. It wasn't mimicking me this time. It wasn't mocking. It was the exact voice of my commanding officer, the man who'd given me orders for half my career. You've done well. Extraction inbound, 2 clicks north. For a moment, against all reason, against all training, I believed him. 2 clicks north, just a bearing, just a distance. I forced myself up, staggering to my feet. My legs shook. My vision swam. But north was a direction, and a direction was hope. I walked. Every step was agony, but I clung to the words like lifeline. Extraction inbound. The forest seemed thinner here, the trunks further apart. The snow crunched softer, the air almost breathable. My chest tightened with something dangerous, something I hadn't felt in days. Relief. I crested a small ridge, legs screaming. Below, in a shallow valley, a helicopter sat waiting, olive drab, blades still. Side door open. Smoke curled from the exhaust. For the first time since the crash, I felt tears spill hot and sharp down my face. I staggered down the ridge, half running, half falling, rifle banging against my chest. "Aki, I'm here!" I screamed, voice cracking. "I'm here!" The snow swallowed my boots as I stumbled closer. The helicopter loomed, solid, real. The door waited, dark and open, and then I saw the footprints. Dozens of them circling the helicopter in the snow, bare feet. I froze. My relief curdled into ice. My breath hitched, chest collapsing. Something moved inside the open door. A figure stepped into view. It was me, not the smiling one, not the gaunt one, not the soldier double. This one was perfect, whole, alive. My uniform clean, my rifle slung, my eyes clear, my stance steady. He looked at me, and I knew. This was the version that belonged here. He raised a hand, beckoning. "Join." My legs locked, my hands shook on the rifle. The snow fell in silent curtains around us. The forest held its breath. The other me smiled softly. "You've been here before," he said. "You'll be here again. The only way out is through us." Behind him in the helicopter's dark interior, dozens of faces leaned into view. All mine. My throat closed, my vision blurred. My finger hovered on the trigger. 6 rounds left, 6 chances to fight or to surrender. The forest whispered, not mocking now, not laughing. Gentle. Patient. Stay alive. Outlast. Join. The valley was silent except for my ragged breath. Snow fell in slow spirals, muffling the world, as if the forest itself leaned in to witness. The helicopter waited, its open door a black mouth in the white, and inside that mouth, they waited too. Dozens of me, rows of identical faces staring with empty patience. The one standing outside, my perfect twin, smiled like a brother welcoming me home. "Captain Dominguez," he said. My name rolled off his tongue with authority, finality. "Your fight is over. Come back." My rifle trembled in my grip. My lungs burned, my knees wavered. But something in me, stubborn, irrational, human, refused. "No," I rasped. "Not like this." The twin tilted his head, pity in his eyes. "You can't win. You've seen it. Every circle brings you back. Every road ends here." The voices joined him, whispering from the forest, from the snow, from inside my skull. "Every road ends here. Every road ends here. Every road ends here." I forced myself upright, teeth bared against the cold. "Then I'll make my own road." And I raised the rifle. The twin didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just smiled wider, serene. "You'll only hurt yourself." I fired. The crack split the valley, echoing off the trees. His head snapped back, mist blooming from the wound. The body staggered, swayed, then dissolved into snow. The helicopter flickered. For an instant, its metal shimmered translucent as if made of smoke. The figures inside leaned closer. Dozens of my faces, mouths moving in unison. 6 left. I fired again. The round punched into the helicopter's frame, and the sound was wrong, hollow, too deep, like shooting into a cavern. The fuselage rippled, shadows bending. The faces inside rippled too, stretching like reflections on disturbed water. 5. My hands shook, but I steadied the barrel, teeth gritted. I fired a third shot. The valley screamed. The sound was wind, metal, laughter, and my own voice all at once, shredding the air until I thought my eardrums would burst. The helicopter convulsed, its shape unraveling, rotor blades melting into the tree line like blackened branches. 4. I staggered backward, heart pounding, every nerve screaming. My boots slipped in the snow, but I kept the rifle leveled. The door was gone now, replaced by a yawning black hollow in the air itself. A void. And from that void, something enormous leaned forward. Not me. Not a double. Something older, deeper. It didn't have a face, only the impression of one. A shifting mask of frost and shadow, dozens of mouths moving where eyes should be. It didn't whisper this time. It spoke. "You've been here before." My legs nearly buckled. My vision swam. I remembered fragments, flashes, impossible but undeniable. Me in this same clearing years ago. Me raising my rifle. Me carving trees. Me failing over and over, trapped in circles and echoes in a forest that ate time. The thing wasn't hunting me. It was wearing me. Every failed escape, every desperate cry, every moment of terror, it had kept them, stitched them into itself. And now it wanted the rest. I screamed, raw and broken, and fired again. The fourth round tore through the void, light exploding like shattering glass. The forest bent, trees warping sideways as if pulled into a whirlpool. The faces inside the void screamed in harmony, my screams, every one of them mine. 3. My chest heaved, my knees nearly buckled, but I raised the rifle again, and I fired. The fifth round cracked the sky itself. The clouds split, bleeding gray light across the valley. The void shuddered, rippling like a torn canvas. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw through it, saw endless white bodies frozen mid-step, endless versions of me stumbling in different directions, all trapped, all circling. Then the vision snapped shut. 2. Tears froze on my face. My arms felt like lead, but I had 2 rounds left. I pressed the rifle to my shoulder, sighted into the black hollow, and roared with everything I had left. Not again. Nunca más, I fired. The 6th round detonated like thunder. The void convulsed, collapsing inward, sucking snow and air into itself. The trees bent, splintered, groaned. My body lurched forward, dragged by a pull I couldn't resist. The voices shrieked, dozens, hundreds, thousands of me screaming all at once. I dug my heels into the snow, fighting the pull, veins straining, body tearing. 1 bullet. 1 chance. I stared into the collapsing void, into the shifting frost mask, into the hundreds of faces that were all mine. And I understood. Killing it wasn't the way. You can't kill something that lives on echoes, but you can deny it. I raised the rifle, barrel pressed under my own chin. The forest went silent, the void stilled, the faces froze, eyes wide, mouths gaping. No, the layered voices hissed, not you, not like this. But I was a soldier, and soldiers know when the only victory left is to deny the enemy their prize. My finger tightened on the trigger. I don't know if I pulled it. The cold rushed in, deeper than marrow. The snow rose like smoke. The forest folded into itself. And then silence. They'll never find me. No patrol, no search party. The taiga will swallow the wreck, the clearing, every mark I carved. But sometimes when the wind cuts across the snow, maybe someone will hear it. My voice carried between the trees. Not whispering, not mocking, warning. Stay alive, outlast. Don't join.